You know what that means, right? We get to go fishing! This is the worst trip ever! Sometimes, as a white guy, I do tend to get a little bit angry. Not as much as this guy, though.
Yes, ladies and longs, in 2005, if you weren't too busy making cringy one-liners at Spaniard, seeing a Capcom IP dig itself up out from the grave after its last entry almost killed it, or I'm going to bust nut. But one game that defined the genre even further than the original game that defied said genre was none other than 2005's God of War. Yes, ladies and longs, before he was featured on LOL Cow Live and fucked up his public image, David Jaffe brought us one of the most defining games in the character action genre. With its tight controls, massive spectacle, and quick time event erotic, God of War has gone down in history as one of the most influential video games of all time, and I don't think I need to tell you where the series went from there. But if you guys are a massive fan of this channel, then hello from your psych ward for the clinically insane long fans, then you know exactly what I'm about to say, and what I've been saying this whole time when clones of video games are the topic of discussion. So I'm not gonna piss around the bush because that's public indecency.
I'm pissing.
Much like Devil May Cry in the last video, since God of War was so genre-defining, of course a lot of people wanted to try and get some of those red souls for themselves. And I've gathered a bunch of them, and we're gonna take a look at them. But before we start, what actually makes a God of War clone? Well, you see, much like Devil May Cry, it's a hack-and-slash game. That much, I hope, is pretty much obvious. But unlike Devil May Cry, God of War is a lot more slower paced and has a much larger emphasis on the spectacle. And the one element of these games that made them famous, much to the dismay of every single gamer in the mid till the late 2010s, are the quick time events. Because it's a hell of a lot more fun to just press a button rather than to get up off your lazy ass and do the stuff yourself. Thank you, David! And as you progress throughout the game, you unlock even more abilities to keep the gameplay fresh, as well as being allowed to upgrade these skills using whatever accumulated currency each game has to it. So with all of that out of the way, what would be the very first game that got inspired by this iconic franchise? Well, in order for us to find that out, we need to take a look at our biggest demon. Now, Nintendo of all companies wouldn't be really the place you'd think to go to when it comes to adapting a super violent hornfest, but that's where you're wrong, because I have the proof right here. Rygar on the NES, released all the way back in 1986. You play as the titular Rygar in a 2D action platformer where the main weapon that he uses is his shield. But don't think that this man's just gonna block stuff like a bitch. No, his shield acts as an offensive weapon for the game as well, where he can send it out and retract it, almost like a Mortal Kombat themed yo-yo. And can you see it? It's an action game. You have a weapon that can be sent out and retracted. It's almost like this game is begging to leech off of the success of God of War.
Lol, hee even. You see, for I jest, because this game predates God of War by 19 years. So obviously it couldn't have inspired God of War. So instead, I'm not gonna piss around the bush, so let's go over to 2002 with the actual very first game to take its inspiration from the iconic franchise.
And what a surprise, it's actually Rygar once again. And he made his, 3 generations later debut on the PS2 with Rygar the Legendary Adventure on the PS2 with the Nintendo Wii port being released in 2009.
Everywhere I go, this follows.
And whereas the NES game had a lot to be desired when it comes down to being a God of War clone, this game leaves nothing to the imagination. It's like a trauma-dumping hooker, because here we can start to see the telltale signs of the God of War formula starting to take shape. We have the fixed camera angles, a good mix of platforming as well as combat using his death yo-yo much like the NES game. And it's up to us to explore each area, take on some enemies, find upgrades throughout the stages to improve certain attributes, find new abilities that allows us to explore further into the stages, as well as take down some big nasties. Also, for whatever reason, this game has got a real hard-on for destroying shit in the environment in order to progress. I'm not joking. When I first played this, I was stuck in this opening hallway for a hot minute, not knowing where I was supposed to go, not knowing that you were supposed to beat the shit out of the rubble in order to progress. So if you're a glutton for architectural demolition, then I think that this game would be great for you. And overall, I really like this game. Its combat is nice and satisfying despite being a little bit too repetitive this early on in the game. It looks great for an early PS PS2 game, and I really like just exploring these stages and finding upgrades. It's really cool. I think that this game did a pretty solid job at taking its own spin on the direction set by God of War an entire 3 years earlier, and I am aware that there is that Wii version too, but I just decided to not play it for this video because it's pretty much the same game, only this time around Rygar is cosplaying as Virgil. Now, a theme that you're going to be seeing a lot in this video are games that take the God of War formula and put it into a lot of movie tie-ins.
You have a brand new flashy move, you rogue. Time to give it a whirl. Go ahead, try it out.
And here we have our first game, The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, released all the way back in 2002.
So here's a freakishly long fun fact for everybody watching this video. I've never actually watched any of the Lord of the Rings movies. No, for you see, my virginity lies with Jar Jar Binks.
Haha, lol, now once again I jest. I did start watching Fellowship of the Ring, but unfortunately that version was the extended cut, which lasts about as long as my depressive fits on a good day. So I think I'll stay clear from these films until I have a completely open schedule, or unless you decide to join the Patreon so I can actually afford this lifestyle. But for the sake of this video, I wanted to take a look at the movie tie-in games on the PS2 because I've heard nothing but good things from them. But when I played them myself, I couldn't really see what all the hype was about. Now keep in mind for this video, I only decided to take a look at the Two Towers because from what I've researched, the Return of the King game is pretty much the exact same thing. So I didn't see really any reason to take a look at it, and me not taking a look at it was further cemented all thanks to my experience with this game. But I do suppose I need to start explaining why I didn't think too highly about this game, don't I?
No.
So if it wasn't too obvious enough from this video in the footage on screen, this is an action-adventure hack-and-slash game that adapts the movie. In the first stage, which I'm assuming is the prologue, you're in this massive battle which looks amazing, and it's surprising to me that this type of scenery runs as well as it does on the PlayStation 2. And here the game explains to us the core mechanics like light attacks, heavy attacks, parrying, so on and so forth. But I don't know, man, every single swing I did and every single attack I landed just felt flaccid.
Because that is the proper term to use when a sword is not performing up to snuff.
It literally felt like I was swinging at nothing, so that didn't feel like there was any impact to what I was doing. So already first impressions for this game wasn't too strong. But I just decided to stick with it for a bit because it might have gotten better. So as we finish the prologue and see Sauron kick the shit out of my men, we then... Oh, this is something that I actually really liked in this game. The way how it transitions from the actual movie footage to the in-game footage and vice versa.
I don't know. Something like this just tends to tickle my brain in a funny way, and I like it.
But any case, as we move over to the next stage, we're placed in the boots of Aragorn, needing to keep Frodo alive from these offshoot Dementor.
Ooh, look at me, I'm a scary. Holy shit.
And for whatever reason, no matter what I did, they would just keep kicking my ass, no matter how much I parried them, no matter what attack that I did, it actually made it look like it hurt them. Nothing. So this is where I originally left the game, but I am no bitch. I knew there had to be something that I was missing, and indeed there was. So you see, what I failed to understand for this specifically, much to the rage of most of the fans of this movie and game, is that I didn't understand why the hell Aragorn had a dead torch in his hand. Is he stupid? Until after I came back to it, I realized that, hey, no, I'm the non-smart, because you see, you need to light this torch up first, then you can attack them. Did that end up saving my interest to see what else this game had in store? No. It still kind of felt repetitive and not as engaging as what you might think for a game like this. Attacks didn't really feel punchy like the intro, and I felt like I was just flailing my arms everywhere trying to punch air, and if I wanted to look schizophrenic, I would do something like that out in public. I have played a little bit of the following stage where you play as Legolas and Gimli, but I just wasn't feeling it all that much. Maybe for a stream I'll come back to this one, or maybe when I decide to make a dedicated video on Lord of the Rings games, but for now, I feel like Star Wars will be better.
Virgins.
Now, Chaos Legion is another action-adventure game that released on the PS2 and Windows back in 2003, and it was developed by yeah, this game was fun. I think we can move on. Gladiator Sword of Vengeance is up next in our entourage of God of War plagiarism, and this game was developed by Acclaim and released all the way back in 2003. And once again, much like the Lord of the Rings game, this was just something I wasn't feeling, but of course I love ad revenue, so allow me to explain. Gladiator Sword of Vengeance starts us off with this guy who looks like a combination of Akuji the Heartless and Minion from Twisted Metal Black. And the entire first 20 minutes of the game is spent in this gladiator arena where you need to kill off enemies while learning the basics of the game's core mechanics. Though, one thing that I really want to mention, this game actually looks pretty damn good. Models and stuff you can definitely see are PS2, but the lighting and shadows are all really damn modern, and they almost look like they could pass off for an early Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 game. If this is what DLSS 5 is promising, then hell, I'm all for it. Any case, this intro was boring. What it consists of is you traveling from one part of the arena to the next, killing off a bunch of enemies, flipping a switch to open the door, lather, rinse, repeat in the following rooms. I will say though that unlike the Lord of the Rings game, the combat here actually felt quite nice, except it's kinda stupid because this game expects you to already be engaged with an enemy before you're able to pull off a combo. What I mean by this is when you just stand there when you're not facing an enemy or aren't in close enough proximity to them, you'll just do a single swipe attack and you need to wait for the animation to stop before attempting it again. It's just really stupid and it breaks the flow of the entire game when you could have just had us do the normal combos but have us stop mid-attack if we missed an enemy, much like, you know, it's inspiration.
I can hear the rage bait being successful.
But allow me to go in deeper with what I experienced with this game before I decided to quit and move on to the next game. Now, as I already mentioned, for literally the first 20 minutes or so, it was spent in this fucking intro tutorial stage, where you're going from one room to the next, killing off enemies, and for this intro stage going on for this long, I legitimately thought that this was gonna be what the whole game was about. Which, if that was the case, it would probably have been considered one of the worst games ever made, but I thought, no man, there's gotta be more to this. So I just decided to push onwards, and thank goodness I did, because once you reach the final room of the Colosseum, you essentially die and wake up in Elysium, where I'm pretty sure a daddy is busy pushing his daughter away because he wants to go to Legoland. And here you meet these two little shits cosplaying Majora's Mask, and these will be the two main quest givers in the game, because once the conversation is over, you go over to your first mission and take on a bunch of enemies in order to unlock your first upgrade, which essentially is the rage mode that you're going to be finding in a shit ton of these games. But you see, while I was finally glad to see that this game was starting to take shape and actually evolve past that intro stage, I quickly discovered what it seems a majority of this game was going to consist of is you going into a stage to find an arena, and once you access that arena, you're going to have to take on waves upon waves of enemies to unlock whatever thing that you're trying to get to progress through the game. So I could be walking down this beautiful shore, taking on some enemies, but that's not going to matter whatsoever because I'm just going to get thrusted into another time challenge to unlock some arbitrary MacGuffin just so that I can move forward. And if you couple that with the combat itself not being 100% the greatest as I've mentioned before, it just turned into a massive slogfest, which is not at all helped by the repetitive structure. Up next we have Nightshade, which is Shinobi. It's the same Shinobi game that we looked in the last video. I think this might be a topic I need to revisit later.
But you see, something I've noticed about these games so far is that a lot of them are rather depressing. You see, so far we've only sat down and looked at some super uber violent edgy shit. So I just think it's time for us to pivot a little bit into a much more lighter direction. And where's the best place for me to start in order to do this? Close the door, I'm trying to take a shit!
Did you pop a nostalgia peenie with this one? Well, if you did, then please leave, I don't need to see that. But oh my goodness, remember when Shrek was good and not animated by AI? I think it's safe to say that the Shrek films are some of the most iconic films of all time, if we're not counting these two. And along with said iconic status, of course, it seemed like a pretty sweet idea to actually let us control these characters and live in the world of far, far away. And while they did attempt to do something like that with the first game released on the Xbox and GameCube, the game where the only people who would be remotely interested in it are fart and belch fetishists, they really hit it out of the park with Shrek 2, released all the way back in 2004. And what game did they decide to use for inspiration of this game's formula? Well, now, once again, if you look back at the plethora of movie tie-in games that were released during the time, Shrek 2 is one of those games that people look back on with great memories. And what did I think of it? I never really played it all that much. I do remember back in like 2005 when I was like a snotty little brat, me and a buddy were visiting someone's house and they were busy playing it, and that's about the only nostalgic memories that I have with this game. But I think me not having any nostalgic memories with this game is actually a good thing, which means I'm able to look at it now like the pessimistic old man I am today. So, what did I think about this game? I actually really liked it. It's nothing too special, it's just a nice little 4-player beat-em-up adventure game that you and a couple of buddies can play if you lived in the outback, meaning that there's absolutely no internet, no nothing, and you actually had to interact with the people that you were playing as. Such a simpler time. Now you see how this game goes is that you and the rest of the crew gets dropped into a stage, and it's up to you to kick the shit out of some enemies and complete certain missions in this game, which the game refers to as snapshots, in order to progress. Now, how many of these missions that you need to do in each stage in order to finish a level, I'm not 100% too sure about, but allow me to explain what some of the missions were that I actually got to do. In the first stage, taking place in the swamp, you need to kill snails and use their eyeballs to open up a gate. Highly impractical, but I'm not exactly one to judge someone's living conditions. Free trap dwarfs, but I'm pretty convinced that this was the optional one. Kick the shit out of some merry men if you are also pissed off like me to find out that Robin Hood wasn't the furry like Disney lied to us. And play this rhythm game where we effectively commit bird genocide.
Just killed 3 generations of one family.
But in any case, I did really enjoy this game. I think this is probably a great shining point as to how to do a proper movie tie-in game, and it shouldn't be how well you adapt the film, it's how well you can make a good game and just slapping these characters into it. So this game, again, I really like. So I'll try and give it a little bit more of a proper go whenever my schedule is a little bit more clear.
Now, ladies and longs, we take ourselves a rather interesting turn for this video because I was hit with some saddening trials and tribulations that led me into making the biggest sacrifice so that I was able to cover as many games as humanly possible for this video. You see, ladies and longs, I always took pride in trying my absolute damnedest to try and experience all of these retro games the most authentic way I could possibly do it. And I have physically put my brain through all the trials and tribulations just so I can experience how these games were meant to be played back when they originally were released. And no matter how many times I've racked my brain trying to get these games to work on their original intended hardware, some of these just didn't end up working. And I figured, instead of just saying to hell with all of them, I've ended up doing the one thing that I absolutely despise doing for these videos, and I unfortunately had to emulate some of them. And you guys must be celebrating to the high heavens because, oh my goodness, Mr. Long finally didn't emulate. This is still probably one of the most annoying things that I've ever had to deal with. And believe you me, I personally have no problem with emulators despite what it might come off as. It is how I end up getting footage for a shit ton of my retro games like the PlayStation 1, NES, SNES, anything older than that. Because if you've looked at the prices of these things, last time I checked, I'm not Gabe Newell. But for the sake of this video, to give some games a proper go, I decided to take all of my pride, put it to one side, and just bite the bullet and emulate so that I could give you guys a proper video. So that means that you Gen X fucks actually win this time.
And what game gets the extremely distinct honor of being my first emulated PS2 game I look at on this channel? Well, that would be none other than 2004's Bloodrayne 2. Now, you may have noticed that I'm talking about a sequel and not the first game, because I do personally feel like the original Bloodrayne is a little bit more of a third-person shooter akin to something like Max Payne, whereas the second game leans more into the hack and slash element, and I am damn happy to say that I was able to play this. Now, in Bloodrayne 2, you of course take control of the titular Rain, who's a vampire, and was the very first video game female to be featured in Playboy, and yes, there is something underneath the blur. Now, what is it that you do in Bloodrayne 2? Well, you see, this being a hack and slash game that was clearly inspired by the horniest white guy, in this game you're going to be exploring locations, doing a little bit of platforming, solving basic puzzles, and taking part in some good combat, and sucking off a lot of people. I mean, sucking their blood. You see, Rain being a vampire, this is how you're going to be able to get your health back, and if you listen to the noise that she makes when she sucks someone, can you see why she ended up in Playboy? Now, combat-wise, this game isn't going to be winning any awards because whilst it is satisfying, the game doesn't really do a good job at registering when you hit an enemy besides from the blood spraying everywhere and the enemy eventually dying. Besides that little visual input, everything just feels a little bit too floaty, much like you're swinging at nothing, like I've mentioned before in the Lord of the Rings game. And that's not really all too great. But what I do have to admit is pretty great is the gore in the game and what they do with it. As you can see, the amount of blood that this game has is pretty on par with something that you would have seen back in the early to mid 2000s, but what makes this game stand out is the fact that there's a dismemberment mechanic and it's pretty scarily accurate. Yeah, sure, you can take off an arm and a torso here and there, but you can also take off the half of someone's head, meaning that it's got some precise damage models in here depending on how you kill the enemy, and I think that's pretty neat, especially for the time that this game was released. Also, being a vampire, you have access to some cool abilities like this Blood Rage mode where Rain's attacks and defense gets a boost, to this cool slowdown ability that probably pays tribute to the game that inspired the first one, and the most useful one for me being this mode that allows you to see the enemies and where to go, which makes navigating around the stages a hell of a lot easier. I actually really enjoyed my time with this game, and it's also one of those franchises that I really would have gotten a resurgence nowadays with the full budget title, instead of just only having those little 2D side-scroller games, which I do love too, but I mean, just make a big budget game like this. Think of the Gooners. Heading from the fairy tale world of Far, Far Away and the vampire-esque gothic inspirations of Bloodrayne 2 to Nevada, we have Samurai Western released in 2004, and this game shall be the first in a couple of games that take on the samurai moniker.
So what I think I'm gonna do personally is I'm just gonna host my very own samurai tier list to see which one of these games we're gonna be taking a look at is the best of samuraiing it.
But to start, we need to look at the first one on our list, and that would be Samurai Western. So in this game, you take control of this samurai, and he's in a Western. Surely I don't think I need to elaborate any further on that. And true to what we're looking for in this video, this is indeed a hack and slash game where you need to kill off a bunch of enemies with your mad samurai skills. And you do said skills at blistering speeds, which almost makes us feel a little bit more in line with Devil May Cry than God of War. It's almost kind of like I'm trying to sequel bait another future video while simultaneously rage baiting people watching this video. And with that type of gameplay style, it makes taking out a large group of enemies extremely satisfying. Adding to this feeling of satisfaction is when you fill up this red bar, you can unleash what this game refers to as the Ultimate Master Mode, where the whole screen gets added with 10 layers of motion blur.
And as we all know, this will become one of the most innovative features in any modern video game that will in no way induce motion sickness as well as give people headaches. Yes, I'm aware I'm keeping this skit up for too long, but look how cool this looks.
And you absolutely eviscerate the enemies, almost making me sweat to think if this part of the video is gonna get age restricted. And don't think that the reward for mastering this game ends here, because Samurai Western is actually an RPG, meaning that once you finish the stages, you get a certain amount of XP to level up your skills. And as you explore the stages as well as beat them, you can unlock new gear to boost certain stats, like this cowboy hat that somehow increases your defense. I wonder if that actually does work.
Helloing my ladies and longs, it's me, Theory Long, and because since Matt Pat is too big of a bitch, I feel like this responsibility will fall upon me. So what we're going to be testing today, as shown to us by our lovely game Samurai Western, I want to see, is it possible if a cowboy hat can actually be used as a viable means of defense? And to help me test this theory, I've got a very special guest, my sleep paralysis demon, Paralysis Long, to help me with this experiment. So on the count of 3, he's going to shoot me so we can see whether or not a cowboy hat is actually a viable means of defense. So on 3, 1...
And you're able to unlock new weapons, which I didn't really end up testing out all that much because the idea of change is something that scares me. But what I can do, however, is recommend that you give this game a go. It's good. 2 out of 10 IGN. Up next in the Samurai Anthology is 7 Samurai 20XX, which is definitely a title because not only is this the first game in a series that I'm convinced only has one game, therefore it's not a series, but it has the audacity to put the number 7 in the title, and hell, it's even got a nice nod to Mega Man because both of them take place in the same year.
Meaning that in both of these universes, a simple calendar has got to be a luxury. What do you think the prohibition looked like?
And I'm not gonna stay here for very long because once again, this game is kind of a little bit of a stretch to call a God of War clone. Sure, it has the more slower-based combat, but I don't know, man, this game felt quite a little bit boring despite me only playing the thing for around 10 minutes. The only real thing about this game that I found hilarious is the very next room after you take out the first bunch of enemies has a boss fight with the combination of Yujiro Hanma and Steve Burnside.
Throwing me a party, eh?
Moving onwards to something that is a little bit more believable to have taken its inspiration from God of War, we have King Arthur released released on the PlayStation 2 back in 2004. And apparently we've gotten ourselves another movie tie-in game, ladies and longs, and this time it's based off of the 2004 movie of the same name, starring John Death Stranding, an actor who will make a later appearance in this video, and Mr. Fantastic.
Say that again?
Another thing that struck me as interesting is that this game, by extension, belongs to Disney, meaning that with this game's connection to God of War, we could be seeing QuickTime Impregnation coming to Disney Plus in 2028. But for the game itself, it was published by Konami and developed by Chrome Studio, who most people will probably recognize for creating the most stereotypical Australian video game of all time, despite, you know. But regardless, I'm not here to talk about the history of the game or its company, I'm here to judge the game. And what I find odd to say about this one is that it seems like it's another situation like the Lord of the Rings game we took a look at earlier. Only this time, if you took out the hepatitis-colored piss filter from the Lord of the Rings and added a little bit more color to this image. The graphics kinda do look a little bit similar, even down to using the live-action segments from the movies as cutscenes, sadly just missing those cool transitions because Chrome is woke. Gameplay is virtually identical and how the missions work are almost one-to-one. It got me so confused that I deadass thought that these were the same developer, but just doing a little bit of research ended up proving me wrong. But these games are very similar from a base gameplay perspective. But I have to bring up something odd with this game. For a game being called King Arthur, which is based off of the fictional king from English folklore, in my nearly 30 minutes of playing this game, I've only ever played as him in one single stage, and I didn't like it. No, instead we got to play as such legendary characters like Roman Commander, Germ Anus, Bors, or Tristan, or my personal favorite, Mr. Long! Yeah, much like the Lord of the Rings game, I wasn't really all too into it. I thought the missions were boring, the gameplay was repetitive, and just didn't do it for me as a God of War clone or a hack and slash in general. But hey, if you are one of the people who actually sung the praises for those Lord of the Rings games when they came out, maybe this will also help scratch that itch.
Now, my ladies and longs, you may realize that I have done a little bit of a silly that not a lot of people watching this would probably view as a silly in the same sense that I do. But for that, grow the fuck up. I am aware that the original God of War released all the way back in 2005. And every single game that we took a look at thus far obviously wasn't released anywhere near the release date. And I do understand that a lot of people probably got successfully rage baited by me blatantly lying about these games taking their inspiration of the original God of War. So I would like to offer you guys my most heartfelt apology I think I'm able to muster. Because honestly, I do respect everybody's time and everybody's effort and everybody's energy that they're taking in order to watch a long-ass video like this one. So the next couple of games we're going to be taking a look at have come out in the year 2005, but came out months before God of War. So cool.
So up first in this months before God of War segment, we've actually got a game that is also going to become an unhealthy habit for this video, and that is a gritty reboot of a beloved franchise. And the first game that's going to headline that trend is 2005's Altered Beast, the gritty reboot to Sega's popular 1988 classic.
Ladies and longs, are you a furry? Well, gone are the days of spending millions upon millions of dollars on a carpet with ears and a tail. Gone are the days where you're gonna be called a toaster just because you bankrupted a power company to build a master spell ooh-woo on it. No, instead, might I introduce you to a much more cheaper alternative. Altered Beast on the PlayStation 2 released back in 2005. You see, in this game, you'll be kicking the shit out of random strangers, and once you've taken out a large sum of them, you're actually able to transform into your persona through painful transformations. Yes, will it be uncomfortable? Sure, but at the very least, you'll be the hot topic. But at the very least, you'll be the hot topic at the 2015 Rain.
And I thought it was mid. Yes, I didn't really like this game all that much because I felt that the controls were a little bit too clunky for my liking. Starting combos weren't really all that great and only began to feel nice once you purchased more of them, and I just ultimately felt a little bit bored and uninterested to go on. But my probably controversial thoughts aside, I don't know how many people ended up playing this thing. What are we actually doing in Altered Beast? Well, you see, you play as John Blonde, and after you crash in your helicopter, I think I didn't end up watching the cutscene, except for a few that we will be seeing later on. Ooh, foreshadowing. You find this briefcase, which I assume had some vial in it, and then poof, wolf, ooh, as they say. We're also shirtless now for some reason, because Sega put a lot of time into that six-pack texture, and damn it, they're gonna show it. So at face value, Altered Beast is a 3D beat-em-up, bringing the gameplay style from the previous game into the next dimension, and as well into the next generation. So you're gonna be exploring these stages, taking on hordes of enemies in either your base human form, or the form that 90% of the game's player base will be gawking over. I don't particularly know what the major differences is between these two playstyles, from what I've personally played just being a human and then turning into into the wolf form, I think you do get a slight defense and offense boost, but I do think that these different forms that you're able to transform into only just serve as a means to unlock different kinds of combos to keep the gameplay variety fresh. So when it comes to the combat, it's kinda pretty basic this early on. But I can see, as you progress throughout the game and unlock even more combos for the different forms that you're gonna be able to acquire, I can actually see a hell of a lot of variety being added to the gameplay. But once again, I don't know, man, this game just wasn't really clicking with me all that much, because it felt a little bit too stiff and clunky, and a little bit too repetitive for this early on in the game. But if you know anything about this game, I don't even think that the core gameplay is what you're here to see. No, if anything remembers anything about 2005 Altered Beast, especially nowadays, it's the fact that this game has a hard-on for its transformation scenes, because when you're ready to transform, then it plays this cutscene of each part of your body transforming into whatever monster you decided to pick. And I do think it's pretty clear to see that this is where most of the game's animation budget went into, and it's probably the most detailed you'll ever see what happens when you go through these transformations in any media, instead of just like yawning really loud and now all of a sudden your barber's rich. Now, moving on from the Sega furries, we now move onwards to Capcom and Romans, and unlike Chaos Legion, which was a sequel-bait video game waiting to happen for this video, I think that Shadow of Rome is a little bit more in line to when it comes down to being a God of War clone. Now, Shadow of Rome is a really fun game, and this was one of those situations where I needed to stop playing because I had to, not because I wanted to. Because Shadow of Rome, as you've come to expect for this video, is a 3D hack-and-slash game, but this being Capcom, there are a hell of a lot of reused assets, like this guy right here in the intro who is just literally Luis Serra, come on. But moving on to the actual gameplay, a huge part of what makes Shadow of Rome so fun to play is there is a lot of variety in this gameplay. Because in this game, a large point of the gameplay is you going into a battle and using whatever weapon you were able to grab from the ground, that or your bare fists to kill off enemies. Or, my favorite thing about this game, make them piss themselves. The supply is limitless. Meaning that when you load into a game, you can either kick the shit out of the enemies with your fist, grab a sword, switch that weapon out for a mace, or a bow and arrow, or a big-ass big that can cleave through enemies. That's another thing that this game does really well. The combat is incredibly gory and really satisfying. And hey, if you're not wanting to find weapons on the ground like change on a sidewalk, you can just steal another combatant's weapon in an animation that looks like two toddlers fighting over a destroyed G.I. Joe. This game was super fun, and I personally think that this could probably been one of the best Gladiator games that we've gotten before we'd see another great one in the form of Rise Son of Rome in 2013. And hot take, this game is better than Crysis. Suck it, normies, inhale copium and piss yourself. You should piss yourself now! Now, contrary to continuity, this game right here was one of the first video games I actually ended up recording for this video, and it was a very interesting first impression to the world of God of War clone. Now, out of all of the more niche and obscure games we've taken a look at in this video, this game might actually be the one that I think a lot of gamers should be aware of thanks to this video here by Gerachao Power Up, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, called God of War vs. Spartan Total Warrior, The Forgotten Rivalry, which is where I actually got my spark to want to make this video. But what I failed to realize is that both God of War and Spartan came out the exact same year. I figured that Spartan must have came out like a couple of years before God of War, much like the other games that I've been looking at in this video thus far. But upon that realization, I had to do a little bit more research as to how far these games were released apart. And lo and behold, God of War takes the released first trophy home by being released an entire 7 months before Spartan, which does technically make this game the very first game to be considered a God of War clone. But the interesting fun facts don't stop there. Now, I nearly thought I fucked up the name because I always read the title as Spartan Total War, this being a more action spin-off to the popular strategy franchise, but turns out I was technically right.
I am a smart, you see.
And adding to this game was actually developed by Creative Assembly, who are primarily in charge of the Total War games, or my personal favorite game of theirs, Hammer Marie. But now, since we got a game on this list that's being compared to God of War, being developed by a company that primarily specializes in strategy games, how did they end up doing? Well, pretty well, I'd say. I actually like this game. I did almost end up shitting myself while I was playing this and saw the large crowds of enemies with this map and all that stuff, because I deadass nearly thought I was getting myself into a Muso game, which is a genre I've really fallen out of love with over the past few years. Fight me on that. But thankfully, that's not the case in this. Yes, the amount of crowds are still huge, but the stages are still primarily contained enough to not make the design of them feel overly repetitive or just have them be large and empty. You see, the main hook of this game is that as you take out a certain amount of enemies with your dreadlocked Spartan that looks like Nathan Spencer from the reboot. Certain other objectives will trigger like you needing to defend this guy with a big-ass pot, to releasing more of your men to help defend a gate, to some more interesting things like needing to tip over a column of boiling oil to stop attackers from entering your base. This one for me personally was one of the coolest reasons because...
Now you see, the reason why this interests me is because there is a myth that back in the olden days during castle sieges, this was actually a method to keep attackers from breaching the castle by pouring scalding hot oil on them. Is this true or not? I don't know. When I googled it, it said it was just a myth, but it's a very cool idea that this game actually takes that idea and puts it into a video game as an actual mechanic. I think for historical reasons, that's actually a pretty cool addition. Not for the people it's landing on, though.
Another cool detail that I believe is also a little bit of a callback to the roots of the developers making strategy games. For whatever reason, when you attack all of these enemies with the plethora of moves at your disposal, and let me tell you, the combat in this game is incredibly satisfying, like the last couple of games, which is a great thing, obviously. For whatever reason, they decided to name every single NPC you kill off like a game over screen in Battlefield 1. So allow me to honor the fallen for a minute, shall we? Oppius Maenus, Tetius Florus, Valerius Carasius, Placus Vetius, Micurius Hatsunis, freakishly longico futas lunas. Now you still might be looking at this game and wondering exactly why this game has so many comparisons to God of War, besides the fact that you're playing as a Spartan. Well, to quell any of your doubt, I did end up playing this game for close to an hour because I was really enjoying my time with it. And I think I found two damning pieces of evidence. This big-ass statue here essentially being this game's equivalent to the Colossus of Rhodes from God of War 2, so the idea of a big boy twink statue boss fight started actually in this game, and the literal next weapons that you unlock are literally called the Blades of Athena. So up next in my reluctant emulation arc is Gauntlet 7 Sorrows, and I just want to bring something to people's attention real quick. Are you perceiving what my perception is perceiving? Do you see these graphical artifacts that are showing up in the menus and at the top of the screen here? I absolutely hate these fucking things, and are one of the biggest reasons why I despise emulators to this day. So for always bitching in my comment section of how I should be emulating,
I'm going to sentence you to 50 hours of uninterrupted Umbrella Corps gameplay. Ass on the seat, bitch!
Any case, I digress. So Gauntlet 7 Sorrows is another one of our post-God of War release games, being released on the Xbox and PlayStation 2 in December of 2005 and 2006 everywhere outside of North America. And apparently this game is also part of a series simply known as Gauntlet, which started out as an arcade game in 1985, but still managed to get games all the way up to 2014 with the game that was developed by Arrowhead. And looking at this gameplay, you can definitely see how this went over to Helldivers. But we're not here to look at some liberal sleep paralysis demon, we're here to look at God of War clones, and thankfully, Gauntlet 7 Sorrows is a pretty solid time. It does lean a little bit more into the classic beat-em-up formula that were abundant in the 80s and 90s, so I do suppose that it is still in line with its original game release, but you can somehow see how a little bit of God of War managed to play some inspiration with this game, mainly stemming from the fixed camera angle, you being able to dodge or do a lunge attack using the right stick, and walking up to crates to obtain currency. Hell, I even pushed the big-ass statue to find a key, so this was also probably something that could possibly have gotten some of its cues from God of War. You know, how oftentimes pushing an oversized rock could end up being the solution to some game's puzzles, or if you were a caveman back in the Mesozoic era, this could become a wheel. And honestly, I really enjoyed myself with this game. I thought the combat was simple yet satisfying, it wasn't all too brain-taxing, it kept the flow going, and I know I only played as one of the characters, but this game does have a few classes for you to pick from, so this should have some replayability, or if you actually have people that aren't just schizophrenic hallucinations, then you can probably try this out with 3 other buddies. If you want to have a God of War clone with multiplayer, then this is probably the game to go for, and preferably not this. Now our next game is Samurai Champloo Sidetracked. Now if you can remember back in my Devil May Cry Clones video, this was actually a game that I slightly talked about when I mentioned Nano Breaker, mainly because of how it allows you to customize combos to your liking. And I do know I probably should have included Sidetracked in that video, but shut up, we're getting to it here now. But a little bit of a fun fact for this video, there's unfortunately a shit ton of games that I had to scratch off of this list, because as much as I do love stretching the idea of what counts as a clone of a certain game and doesn't, some games just were not going to cut it as much as I would have loved to stretch it. The most notorious game that I decided to leave out of this video being Death by Degrees. But I decided to still give you some footage for it for this segment of the video so you have something to keep you busy at night. And Sidetracked was also going to be a game that I was going to axe for similar reasons until I discovered something rather interesting.
You see, a long time ago, there was this place called Japan, and upon the millions upon millions upon millions of people that inhabit this beautiful country, there's only one particular person that I want to take a look at, and he is known as Goichi Suda.
Now, as I've mentioned in my Nintendo Wii horror video, Suda51 is probably no stranger at all, and part of what put him on the map was indeed No More Heroes, released in 2007 on the Nintendo Wii. But before that, like, literally by 1 year, we got Samurai Champloo Sidetracked on the PlayStation 2, which he actually directed and his company, Grasshopper Manufacture, actually developed. Now, fun fact here, I actually 100% missed out on the fact that Suda actually made this, but upon going back and trying the game one more time, man, I'm fucking stupid, because this game 100% oozes with Suda's charm and design. And hell, ladies and longs, this game was awesome! Now, I don't really know much about the anime that this game is based off, but shit, I sure as hell want to watch it now after I played this. But let's first see what the game is like, shall we? Oh, and if it isn't obvious enough, this is gonna be the newest contestant in to see which game has the best samurai game I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Now, if you've come to expect from this video, and from Suda himself, this is a hack and slash video game where one major mechanic is this little bar up here that indicates a string of buttons that each link up to various combos. And I think I might have been a little bit wrong in the DMC video where I mentioned that you can customize your own combos. Maybe that is still a feature, but I didn't play far enough into the game to figure this out. But these combos are tied to whichever record you currently have equipped, and you're able to switch between the records using the right stick, meaning that just with one flick of the stick, you're able to have access to two completely different combo styles, which I think is a really unique concept. And as you're busy exploring the world, you're going to be able to locate shops where you can purchase even more records to add even more combos to your ever-growing list. But oh my goodness, if you know Suda, this man knows his crazy style, because everything from this game is stylized to the point where I'm even surprised that the PS2 was able to run this smoothly at all. Everything oozes with that early 2000s punk hip-hop style that, as a person who grew up during that time, absolutely misses.
Tonight will be the night that I fall for you.
And what literally hooked me even more to this game than I already was were some of the special events that you're able to take part in. Because you see, well, you can just hack and slash like a normie bitch, you're also able to do certain things like counter opportunities, quick rage mode type segments where you're able to kill off enemies much quicker, or my personal favorite, when you stun an enemy, you get thrusted into this mini game where you need to slash the ever-living shit out of the enemy, and when you reach 100 slashes, this happens. Yeah, play this game. I don't give a shit what your stupid excuses are, like raising a child, paying your taxes, feeding your family, serving out a life sentence. Play this game right now and your happiness will grow exponentially. Now moving over to one of the games I've been reprimanded in my Devil May Cry video for not including, and that game is 2007's Ghost Rider, based off of the Nicolas Cage movie where he does the funny eyebrow. Now, another fun fact, ladies and longs, this was actually a game that I was originally going to include in that video, and you remember this little skit that I made? I actually meant to use that in the Ghost Rider segment for the video, but I'm talking about it now, so I'll use it here again anyway. Now, the reason I decided to omit it from the Devil May Cry video is that when I played it back then, I definitely did see a hell of a lot more of God of War than Devil May Cry in this game, and it mainly stemmed from one thing, the circle icon appearing above the enemies' heads allowing you to do a finisher, and the only thing that I can really see in this game that ties it to Devil May Cry is the shotgun that you can use. Other than that, with the slower gameplay, I think it's safer to say that this is more God of War rather than Devil May Cry. But does it at the very least do what it sets out to do well? Yes? The reason for my hesitation is, well, yes, I do think that this game is actually really good. My main problem stems from its repetition. I shit you not, I played this game for around an hour to try and see what other interesting things could have happened, and it's pretty much still the same song and dance all the way from the beginning of the game up until where I decided to stop playing. Now, what exactly do you do in Ghost Rider starring Willy's Wonderland? Well, you see, it's a God of War clone. Thank you so much for stopping by, ladies and longs. Now piss off and remember to wipe when you... Which means you go from one room to another, get locked in it, and need to kill a certain amount of enemies in order to move on, fight a boss, the cycle continues. And the way how you do said killing is with your trusty chain whip, your shotguns and your special abilities like stunning all of the enemies at once so that you can pull off an execution on them a hell of a lot easier. And the only other real noteworthy thing about this game to keep it in line with the Ghost Rider character is that this game also does include these motorcycle segments, which were fun enough, but really nothing or all too much to write home about. But I will say though, the game itself might be repetitive, but I do still think that it's a pretty solid God of War clone. But I should say that there are a hell of a lot better clones if you wanted to play as a Marvel character. That's a little bit of foreshadowing, by the way. Ladies and longs, when I started up writing this video script, my biggest fear was if some of the games I took a look at eons ago would still be able to hold up. Heavenly Sword itself might be one of the most interesting games on this list that attempted to cash in on the popularity of God of War, primarily because it is still a PlayStation exclusive, meaning that I assume anyway, the folks over at Sony were pretty much allowed to do whatever they wanted with the formula and put its own spin on it the way how they see fit without any real legal repercussion. And if you know anything about Heavenly Sword, I'm pretty sure you've heard it be thrown around as the female God of War. God of Woe. And this game was the second ever developed project by a British company called Ninja Theory. Yeah, they did develop a game on the original Xbox called Kung Fu Chaos, but I'm pretty sure that Heavenly Sword was the game that ended up putting them on the map. And what have they done ever since? An underrated gem that nobody remembers, Jared Leto, one of my favorite games of all time, a live service game that was dead on arrival, and my biggest disappointment next to my son. But we're not here to judge them based on what they've done following Heavenly Sword, we're here to judge them on Heavenly Sword. So how was Heavenly Sword? I love this game. As I mentioned at the beginning of the segment, my biggest fear with going back to some of these games was worrying how well they'd be able to hold up. But thankfully, Heavenly Sword has aged like a fine wine because I still think that this game is worth a go. There was, however, one thing that I was worried about though, with this game specifically, but we shall cross that bridge when we get to it, okay? Now sit tight, here's a lollipop to keep you busy. Now, in this game, we take control of Nariko, a character who most people would probably only recognize because of her addition in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, a game that is severely overhated, so shut the hell up. And apparently she did a mommy death birth, meaning that when she was born, her mommy didn't make it, meaning that the whole group of people that she belongs to views her as a curse. It's a rather interesting premise, but I don't exactly play these games for the story this time around. But before we even get to that backstory, we're thrusted into this big-ass battle, whipping enemies left, right, and center, and I think that this big-ass battle is a perfect way how to do something like this, unlike what Lord of the Rings did. Whereas in that game, it didn't feel like I was really doing much and everything felt stiff and floaty. In this game, and I personally think that this entire intro segment is a great way to get you ready for what you'll be doing later in the game. And what I find really cool is that this is what plays before we get to the main menu, and then it just smoothly transitions into it. And I think that's just such a cool stylistic addition. Now onwards to the gameplay. Now, from a video that's about God of War clones, what can we expect here? Well, we got the scope, we got the ability to dodge in any direction using the right stick, and we get to attack enemies. 6 out of 10 IGN. But where this game stands out in terms of its gameplay lies in 4 major components: the core hack and slash gameplay, the set pieces, the Heavenly Sword itself, and the aftertouch. Now, the hack and slash gameplay is pretty self-explanatory. You kick the ever-living shit out of any prick and make them wish that they never set foot into a video game. The set pieces are the segment where you play as one of Nariko's buddies named Kai, where she needs to use her crossbow to take out enemies at range, or having Nariko man a bunch of different mounted weapons. The Heavenly Sword, when you unlock it, you gain access to 2 additional types of combat modes, one of which being the speed mode, where the damage is reduced and your range is extended, and your power mode, where your range is limited and you're slower to attack, but you do kick the shit out of people a hell of a lot harder. And the aftertouch being the greatest and most stupidest thing on the planet, but I love it so much. You see, the aftertouch is essentially those, oh, you get to control the projectile when you're firing it thing that we've seen a bunch of times in a bunch of different video games. But where it's But where it's pretty sweet in Heavenly Sword is that anything that you pick up and use as a projectile can be used to activate the aftertouch. Even enemies that you've killed, which is the dumbest and greatest thing I've ever seen implemented in any video game. You see, you just killed an enemy, right? And this is probably hell of a lot more darker than even Warhammer, because even in death, duty does not end. Because once you failed your master, you get to serve a new master and have your rotting corpse be slingshotted into the faces of your still alive brothers. Oh, I'm dead. You. Yes? You're gonna be my weapon now. No! Now, the biggest thing that I was worried about while I was playing this game too was the implementation of the 6-axis controller, because my original PS3 controller shat itself years ago. It still does work, but if I have to click in the right stick to zoom in on a first-person shooter and it activating every single fucking button on the PS3 controller except that one more time, I think I'm about to substitute my rope noose for barbed wire. I also did, if you can remember from last year, I did receive that one controller from the Sweetie Pie companies that actually works surprisingly well with the PlayStation 3, almost one-to-one like a 6-axis controller. But the only problem with that is if I wanted to do it, I would have needed to stay tethered to my PlayStation 3 using its USB cable. And unfortunately, this thing is shorter than most of the people watching this' attention span, so I was starting to wonder if the 6-axis implementation wasn't going to become a hindrance for this game specifically. So can you imagine my relief when I was able to play most of my recording session without needing to use it whatsoever? Because thankfully the aftertouch can be controlled with the stick, and unfortunately though there was one thing where you needed to shake the controller to do a mid-air recovery, but thankfully that warning pissed off after like 30 seconds, so it wasn't too big of an issue for me, although it makes me worry how important something like this would be later on. But thankfully for this recording session, it wasn't too big of an issue for me. I'll just have to probably try and make an effort to try and find a new PS3 controller. But if you guys are watching this and you are retro fans, I'm pretty sure that anybody watching this does still have a working 6-axis, so this is primarily mostly a me issue. But I was still extremely happy that returning to this game, it was still actually as great as I remember when I first played it. So, what are you waiting for? Give it a go now. And maybe we'll get PlayStation All-Stars 2 when Nariko can actually be remembered for once again. Up next in our competition to see who is going to be the very first next-gen God of War, we have a game that belongs to a series that I'm pretty sure actually served as the inspiration for the original God of War, and it featured Arnold serving as a misogynist. Slats. Now, unfortunately, we aren't going to be hearing the beautiful voice of Arnold, last name possible cancellation if pronounced incorrectly. Now, what exactly is Conan? Well, you see, it's a game that released all the way back in 2007 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Note that this was back in the day when PC ports were cringe, and was developed by a company called Nihilistic Software. Now, for the keen eye, I'm pretty sure some of you must have just got traumatizing flashbacks, and for those of you who blocked this company's name from your subconscious, allow me to remind you what they also had a hand in making. Yes, this company doesn't exactly have the best track record, specifically when it comes down to making PlayStation games, because they made the worst looking Sly Cooper known to humanity, and this is probably why we aren't getting a Sly 5 on PS6-7, and they're also probably the main reason that we won't ever see a new Resistance game ever again. It's really quite tragic, and they even did a Call of Duty. But before we got to that inevitable downfall, we had Conan to deal with, and I'm gonna be honest with you here, this game is good. It's definitely not God of War, but I will have to admit that this game itself is pretty solid. And I wouldn't even really call it mid like some online sources would have you believe. It's a simple point A to point B God of War ROM with a little bit of extra features to make the game stand out. And I think I would 100% recommend giving this game a go. Now, what makes this game so stand outish from God of War is primarily the entire idea of being able to pick up and use enemy weapons. And these can range from dual wielding weapons to big ass swords that all have their own unique functions and strength levels. And much like Heavenly Sword, even these weapons, once you're done using them, they can be chucked at enemies to use them as ranged attacks if you want to deal with enemies at a distance. And what I also do appreciate in this game specifically is just how gory it is. Because much like God of War, when you really ham into an enemy or parry them, you can initiate a counterattack and just watch how the limbs and ligaments and their guts and other biological big-ass words just go flying everywhere. And the combat itself I thought was really great. It's literally just a basic God of War formula from from start to bottom, maybe just with a slight downgrade in polish. Hell, this game even does give you some special abilities that you can use by filling out this yellow bar, and it even still has the slight puzzle-solving elements sprinkled into the mix. Oh, and how could I simply forget the quick time events? Whether it's opening doors to the ones you're going to be executing during boss fights, I feel like the quick time events were the one element from God of War that got carried over the best in this entire game, and I'll let you be the judge of whether or not that was a good or bad thing. Oh, and don't worry, ladies and longs, if there's another thing that I feel that this game has done excellently and really brought over to show you the power of the next generation of the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, and truly made this the first true next-gen God of War experience, there are even tits! Onwards from one licensed game over to the next, here we have ourselves Beowulf the game. A game based off of the CG animated movie of the same name. And let me ask you this, did you know that this movie was CG animated? I sure as hell didn't, and every single time I looked up this movie in years past, I always thought that Google was busy gaslighting me. Now for this game, I don't really have all too much to say because I can sum this game up with two comparisons, God of War and Overlord. Now there's also a game I'm pretty sure you haven't heard in a while. Now when it comes down to what Beowulf is, I can say it's a pretty straightforward God of War clone once again. And when it comes down to the game's overall mechanics, I think that they're pretty solid except for the platforming and climbing. I actually don't really know why, they just genuinely didn't feel all that responsive whatsoever, but that's just a minor gripe. But the combat, on the other hand, I thought was great, and it even carries over some mechanics from something like Conan over here, where you're actually able to pick up weapons that scatter all throughout the environment and use them to your heart's content, with them wearing down after every single time you use them. And hey, you do still even have the standard quicktime events, except these things nearly made me lose my shit because of how strict the timing is to initiate them, meaning that if you wait a slight second too long, or have ADHD, whatever the reason might be, you basically need to restart the entire chain of them again, which is annoying, but I did end up getting used to it. I feel like these QuickTime events are pretty much trial and error, which at least there's a solution to it, but it's not a great one. But where this game really tries its hardest to stand out from its inspiration, and why I bring up Overlord as another comparison, is that a large feature of this game is that you have this band of misfits called your Thanes, or something like that, and these are essentially going to be our companions throughout the stages. Now, why do I see this as problematic? Because these guys are essential to your main game progression, because you're going to be needing to keep a set amount of them alive if you want to progress through the stages smoothly. Because in certain instances, there'll be big-ass stones blocking your way that you're going to need to keep a set amount of them alive if you want to pass through it. But this shit in its own takes forever. But however, the game's developers did think about how tedious this might have been for the average player, and decided to add another tedious mechanic to give you a slight illusion of progression, because two negatives make a positive, people. You see, in the third stage after the tutorial and the boss fight, before you head out into the main meat of the game, you're on this boat that pretty much teaches you how you're going to be commanding your Thanes to complete these tasks, and it's a rhythm game. A rhythm game that goes on for far too long and isn't really in any way, shape or form fun to take part in, because it is just literally two buttons, triangle for the long presses and square for single presses. It's really not that hard or fun in any way, shape or form, and you're gonna have to keep doing this just in order to progress through these fucking boulder pushing segments and progress through the stages. This is what really caused me to stop giving a shit with this game, because as I'm sure you can tell, this breaks the pace and the fun combat extremely badly, and it just becomes repetitive. And I didn't really personally play far enough to experience this for myself, though I am aware that this is a problem, but this can become a larger hindrance to you because your Thanes can actually die. Not permanently though, thankfully, because you can still revive them, but can you imagine getting to one of these parts and you're one man short? The only real takeaway that I can make with this game is that I now know that you're able to boost the morale of any situation with a simple rhythm game. Now, Spider-Man Friend or Foe is gonna be a quick mention because I do feel like this game does share some DNA with God of War to have it be considered for this video, but not much to talk about because I really didn't like this game. Now, this is one of those games that back in the day I remember seeing a lot of in commercials, as well as walking inside any video game store or store that have video games in them. And of course, being a Spider-Man fan, it's always something that I wanted to give a go. And And then 19 years later have passed. And I'm really glad that I didn't pester my parents to get it for me when I was still a youngin'. Now I do think that if anybody knows anything about Spider-Man Friend or Foe, is that this was yet another drop in quality for a Spider-Man video game, in the exact same year that we've got what is probably the worst Spider-Man game as well.
I stroke my pickle.
Now, the big premise for this game is that you're going to be taking control of Spidey as he teams up with various rogues from his franchise, and that, I would say, is probably the biggest draw towards this game. But, oh boy, if you don't have the patience to sit through what this game has to offer, then I don't even really think that that selling point was justified, because this game is boring. Now, where the game gets its cues from God of War is the fixed camera angle, different abilities that you can get while progressing through the stages, a character that really likes War too much, you know, like that one part in God of War.
The stomach acids are quite riveting this time of year.
The ability to upgrade certain attributes of your character with currency gained in each of the stages, you know, the works. I don't think there's any QTEs, but I didn't play far enough to really figure this one out. But why I quickly dropped this game is because it's repetitive and it takes extremely long to really get a move on. And if what I've just experienced in this short amount of time that I've played is going to be how it is for the rest of the game, then yeah, I'm good, thanks. Because how progression works in this game is that you first place in the shield helicarrier with these portals to each of the game stages, almost similar to something like Crash Bandicoot 3 in a way. And within each of these teleporters, you have a total of 4 stages for each of the main levels. At least that is what I'm assuming, because if the later levels had even more stages to them, I would probably lose it. But the problem again is that these stages are a repetitive slogfest with nothing really all too interesting happening in them. And what's the kicker is that they take way too damn long. The first stage alone, and I'm talking about the stage, not even the whole world, took me around like 15 minutes of just bashing Clanker's skulls in until I saw the end. And when I loaded up the second stage only to find that it was doing the exact same thing, I decided to drop it because I don't think that the stages preceding this will be any better. And if we're going off of each world having 4 stages that all last around 15 minutes each, and from what I've seen on the helicarrier there are a total of 6 worlds that you can take part in, that would imply that the game can last you around 6 hours if you want to see the thing all the way to the end. And if the later stages are just as boring to run through as the first stage, then yeah, I'm good. Maybe for a stream where I want to put myself through some misery, but for a video where I'm covering close to 60 games, can you understand why I don't want to spend too much time wasting on a game that I really didn't enjoy to begin with? It even also upsets me because even the game's emphasis on co-op couldn't really save my interest, because they all controlled virtually the exact same as Spider-Man, but with slight changes that fits their character. But I know what you're thinking. I'm playing as Prowler, so now I have to do it, don't I? Ah, yes, ladies and longs, we once again take a little trip to the world of Far, Far Away with what a lot of people consider to be the worst Shrek movie of all time. And since this was still the era where pumping out a game for a blockbuster film was commonplace, and since the last game was such a tremendous success, a game based off of the third film was a no-brainer. Now I want to address the elephant in the room here real quick, or should I say, ogre? When recording these games, I'm probably sure you can tell for yourself I opted for the PlayStation 2 version of the games because they were the games I was able to obtain the easiest, but I am aware that a lot of these games during 2007 were released on the current consoles at the time, namely the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. But in the case of the Xbox 360, mine's disc tray has sadly bit the bullet almost 10 years ago at this point, and sadly doesn't work anymore. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of these games that I wanted to take a look at that had Xbox 360 versions don't all have backwards compatibility on the Xbox One or Xbox Series S and X, barring a few exceptions like Conan, which we just looked at. So for most of these games, I just ended up opting for the PlayStation 2 version because they were just the easiest for me to get. But upon looking up Shrek the Third for this video, I don't really see any particular difference aside from the graphics when it comes to the Xbox 360 version, so I don't overall think we're gonna be losing too much if we play the inferior versions. And oh boy, inferior is the right word to talk about, because this isn't Shrek. This is Shrunk. This isn't Donkey. It's Donkey. This isn't Puss in Boots. This is Ginger Pooh.
pussy.
But we're not here to talk about the game's graphics, now are we? We're here to talk about the gameplay. And while probably not as fleshed out as Shrek 2, this game is still surprisingly a hell of a lot more of a God of War clone than even its predecessor. Which, I mean, would make sense. The second game didn't exactly come out after God of War, now did it? Successful rage bait, idiot. But I still think that this game is a pretty solid clone. It does basically follow the whole idea of beat up a bunch of enemies, or in the intro stages case, beat the shit out of a people who are just trying to help you look at your best or take your frustrations out on furniture and ice. Is you? But I do think that the gameplay itself is pretty satisfying and fun, but I do need to, however, ask where the hell is the health bar in this game? We only have this blue recycle meter up here that stores what this game calls fairy dust, the E for everyone equivalent of angel dust.
Yeah, dude, I'm going to far, far away and I'm gonna animate Shrek using Sora AI.
And what this meter does, it basically allows you to do a special attack depending on which character you're playing as, or when you fill it up, you basically go into this matrix time here, and you're able to do a finisher on all of the enemies, almost in a similar way that we've seen in Ghost Rider. And why I say depending on each character is that we're actually able to not only control Shrek, but Donkey and Puss as well. Me saying that name too many times is gonna get me age restricted, isn't it? And thankfully, all of these characters do have their own unique movesets. Not as unique as needing to use them in Shrek 2 in order to progress, but unique enough that each playable character isn't just a total skin swap. I actually ended up really having a lot of fun with this game. It is a hell of a lot more basic than Shrek 2 in terms of its mechanics and overall structure, but I think it leaning more into the God of War style wasn't really all that bad of an idea, and I think I want to come back to this game in future. But I think me coming back to this later down the line is a little bit far, far away. The movie tie-ins just keep rolling in now, don't they? Because here we go, ladies and longs. We've got ourselves another one based off of the TMNT movie released all the way back in 2007. And this film, as well as the game, are probably two of my favorites of all time. So for what is probably the first time in my channel's history, we're actually going to be looking back at a game that I actually have a lot of nostalgia for myself. And despite me going back and looking at this game with a new analytical eye for video games, I can't still help but recommend this game to everybody. Now, TMNT is probably another big stretch for being a God of War clone, but I've been successfully rage baiting you for almost an hour now at this point, so might as well keep going at it. Now, TMNT itself is an action-adventure video game that loosely follows the movie, and how the story is presented is kind of unique, because it's like the turtles are reminiscing about the events of the movie. So it's kind of both a sequel and an adaptation at the same time that even has its own unique levels based on how the story is being retold. Now, when it comes down to the gameplay, it's primarily split up into three different types of games: a speedrunning competition, actual combat, and a collectathon, and they pull off these three different objectives really well, in my opinion. Now, to explain what each of that means, the speedrun basically means that you need to beat the stages as fast as possible. The combat being pretty self-explanatory, or at the least I hope so, because this isn't exactly like Undertale where every single combat encounter can have a peaceful solution. And the collectathon element being you collecting these coins throughout the stages, and all of these accumulate to a rank at the end of the stage. But where a lot of the variety within these game modes come in is with each of the turtles' special abilities, and how they can use them both in terms of combat as well as traversal. Like Leo, for some reason, being able to phase through these bars almost like he's Raziel in Soul Reaver, or Raphael being able to unleash a screen nuke that takes care of all the waves of enemies and gives you a slight strength increase, Donnie using his big stick to vault through narrow passages that you can't normally jump through, and Mikey being able to helicopter his nunchucks almost like he's Rayman. And keep in mind, this game was published by Ubisoft.
So I would like to send a personal message to the French. Fuck you!
But where it really starts to get interesting is later in the game when you're able to take control of all of these turtles at once. Because now, not only do you have access to all of these individual abilities through the push of the button, but now you also get the ability to jump farther distances, making platforming a hell of a lot more interesting, and you have access to team attacks that allow you to do massive damage to the enemies. But now I also have to bring up something interesting that I've noticed while I was busy playing this game. These people, especially Splinter, just cannot shut the fuck up about family, can they? It's basically like Family Ganda, because every 2 seconds when Splinter shows up on screen, it's stuff like
family is a force. Family is a force that should be shared. Family is a force that can be multiplied. Family is a force that one should take care of.
Family is like a laxative, helps me when shit gets rough. But regardless, I still think that this game was a blast, and you would probably like it too. Or not, because you seem like a bitter prick. Speaking of being a bitter prick, Crash Bandicoot. And before you think that I'm calling him a bitter prick, you're stupid. No, what I mean by being a bitter prick is with the people who can't seem to stop bitching about this game and its sequel. Crash of the Titans and Crash Mind Over Mutant are Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant are action platformer games that released in 2007 and 2008 respectively. And if they're showing up on a video like this, then I'm pretty sure it's safe to say you know what trends they were busy adhering to around the time when they came out. Because what these games ended up doing is to ditch the corridor platforming that was established in the last games and traded them off for something that resembles what white people would think happened to them when they get a little bit angry. Now, what you end up doing in these games are followed. You spawn into a level and you need to do some platforming, beat the shit out of enemies, and jack off.
And no, not in that way.
What I actually mean is one of these two games' biggest selling points, besides Crash looking like he's been rejected from Green Day, is that you're able to hijack these big monsters here that all have their own unique abilities to help taking out enemies a hell of a lot quicker and to solve certain puzzles in the environment that Crash wouldn't be able to do on his own. And before you're allowed to jack these enemies, you have to arouse. You first need to weaken them a bit and then press the circle button in order to take control of them. And in Mind Over Mutant's case specifically, I'm only going to be mentioning this because these two games are practically very identical, you can even store one of them for later use, which I thought personally was really cool. Sure, not all of the monsters' playstyles are particularly great, but they do offer up a change from the base game's formula if you were finding just playing as Crash exclusively a little bit stale. Now, do I recommend these games? Yes, I do, but I'm also aware that I'm the only motherfucker on YouTube that seems to not really have a problem with these games' existence. Hell, I even featured these games on my Overhated Games video I did a while back, and I still stand to that opinion to this day. Are these games peak Crash Bandicoot? Of course not! Are these games peak of action-adventure games? No! Are these games, however fun, turn your brain off and laugh at the cringe early 2000s fart jokes, and in Mind Over Mutant's case, one of the funniest stories I've ever seen told in a game? Yes! I hit my mic. So stop treating them how you want the games to be and just accept them for what they are. That's my inspirational Crash Bandicoot quote for the day. I know you've been missing them, so we're finally back on movie times for this section of the video, and it's with 2007's Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. And funnily enough, this might be one of the most relevant franchises on this video, based on what happened many years later, but we're gonna cross that bridge when we get to it.
Oh, and a little bit of a fun fact, I never actually ended up watching these movies like Lord of the Rings.
The closest thing that I was able to experience regarding this franchise was the Lego game and the collaboration that they did with Sea of Thieves. But it seems like I'm popping my cherry for this video, so I'm glad you're able to see me deflower in real time. Now for this video, I decided it would be interesting to take a look at the three versions of this game that got released. The flagship PlayStation 3 version, the PlayStation 2 version, and an interesting little console that I'll talk about when we get into, because I'm sure that these were the only versions of the games that really fitted into the God of War formula. So, I'm really sorry to those of you who liked the DS version or the J2ME Java Phone cellular version. I will unfortunately be excluding you from the list. Now I want to do something interesting here a little quick, and I want to start off with the PlayStation 2 version of the game because I find it the most interesting. Then we'll jump into the PlayStation 3 version. Now, the PS2 version is unquestionably inspired by God of War. You've gotten yourself the fixed camera angles, smooth and responsive combat, as well as some QuickTime events. And I gotta admit, this game is really fun. The combat feels satisfying, the game runs extremely damn well, and overall it's a really quality movie tie-in. But what I really like in this game is that throughout your exploration of these stages, you're able to pick up some utility items. The few I was able to find being bombs, which I really don't think I need to explain what they're gonna be used for, a flintlock that actually works and doesn't blow off your hand, acting as a ranged attack, and some fried chicken which helps you regain some of your lost health if you were a silly little bozo that needs a sponge bath. Now I gotta say here, ladies and longs, this was a pretty damn fun game. I've already mentioned the gameplay and the combat being smooth and satisfying as all hell, but couple that with just the items that you're able to find, the environments being so damn varied and charming, and just working as well as it does, I have no problem recommending this game to people. Hell, it even impressed me because as I was playing later, it has some slight open world elements to it as well. Like after we escaped this jungle level, we were able to explore this town, doing quests, taking part of mini games, so I'm actually really eager to see what lies beyond what I've already played, but unfortunately we have some other versions that we need to take a look at, and oh boy, The flagship version, you say? Pirates of the Caribbean at World End's PS3 version, and by extension Xbox 360 version, is the most jarring downgrade I think I've ever seen in my entire life, which I find hilarious because I'm playing the quote-unquote superior version. Now, whereas the PlayStation 2 version felt like it did a pretty damn good job of being a God of War clone and a pretty fun game in general, this game decided that I wanted to be a pretty poor imitation of Uncharted. Gone are all of the pretty colors for the most dark brown realism that they could muster, which I suppose was commonplace for the time. Gone is the satisfying combat, which actually made you feel extremely involved in favor of just mashing the X button a few times and watching the enemies just slump to the floor like they want out of this mess too. And pretty much Gone is the soul that clearly went into the PlayStation 2 version, whereas this version just felt like it was trying to be a tech demo to show what the next generation of consoles were capable of doing. But oh my goodness, this game was just such a drag. And I need to remind you that this is the version that most people were probably going to want to play to accompany the new shiny PS3 and Xbox 360. I'm just gonna tell you right now, steer clear of this version. I don't really know if it gets any better than from what I've just been able to play, but the way how I see it, if I was able to have fun right off the bat with the PS2 version, and I have to wait for the flagship version of the game to become somewhat bearable after what I've played, then yeah, do I need to explain where my priorities lie? But I did mention that I looked at a third version of this game, and I also think it's pretty interesting to include it because of its relevance to this video.
It's a nut you can play with outside. What?
PSP.
Ah, yes, ladies and longs, the PSP. How we should have treated it better. I think it's pretty much no surprise that this was one of the most impressive handhelds for its time, and even more so in retrospect of just how much this thing was a portable PS2. And of course, why I mentioned that this thing is so extremely relevant to this video is that if you can remember, the PSP has gotten two of its very own God of War games, and one of those actually being my favorite God of War experience with Chains of Olympus. And no, it's not just because I get to play a mini game where I abandoned my daughter. So of course, with the system being capable of actually handling such intense games, of course it's pretty obvious that a lot of companies were going to try and port their own God of War type experiences to the handheld. And the first one that we're going to be taking a look at for this video is Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. But I'm also not going to really waste too much of your time here because it's pretty much just the ports of the PS2 version. So of course, if you wanted that version of the game on a go, then here you go. But now I do feel that it is time that we move over to our next game.
And in order to do that properly, I'm over here at my green screen Photoshop airport image because we're going to be going on an adventure. A world adventure, some might say.
How I've wanted to cover a Sonic game at length on this channel for the longest time, and what better place to start than with the game that is the most relevant to the topic at hand. Sonic Unleashed is probably a game to any Sonic fan or gamer in general that needs no introduction. It was the game that was the first earliest recorded instance of clowning on IGN for being shit with their opinions. It was the first game where Sonic was going to travel throughout the entire world, meet new people, see exotic sights, and most importantly, it's the very first game that introduced the ever so beloved
I know little girls.
Now, once again, this is one of those games that I really feel gets a little bit too much hate in the Sonic fandom. But me, personally, I really liked Sonic Unleashed. Both versions, as a matter of fact, because I do think each of them do something better than the other. Now, for this video specifically, I decided to take a look at the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 2 versions of the games respectively. The PS3 version because it's the one that I had the easiest access to, and the PS2 version because it's pretty much the exact same thing as the Nintendo Wii version, and after my Nintendo Wii horror video, I really don't want to waggle any more sticks. And no, I'm not talking about masturbation, that is beneath me.
I'm no more heroing, it's so good!
Now for the uninitiated, Sonic Unleashed starts off with one of the best intros to any Sonic game. And in this, Eggman captures Sonic and sucks all of the color out of the Chaos Emeralds for whatever reason. And by doing that, that doesn't only give Twitter artists a new rev sheet, but it also causes the world to get split open and unleashes entity known as Dark Gaia. And after Sonic survives a fall from outer space, he befriends this little twink that my best buddy Poncho absolutely loved.
John, why is Chip here? You know I don't even like him! You
Maldito fue el día en el que tu mera existencia se le presentó al desgraciado diseñador de Sega, el cual únicamente pudo tener tal epifanía a causa de sus vicios y cuqueadas directas en contra de su esposa.
And to take part in this game's two primary gameplay styles, the day and the night. You see, during the day you're just normal Sonic, and the goal is to dash through each of these stages, destroying enemies and trying not to make Sonic run into the wall like a stupid woke little hedgehog. And during the nighttime, we're able to play with what I'm 100% convinced was the devs' main gameplay style that they wanted to try and push, being the based Werewolf. Now I'm gonna branch off here real quick between the two versions because they are pretty different. On the 7th generation version of Unleashed, the gameplay is pretty much one-to-one God of War, only this time it can be enjoyed by infants, where you're going to be going throughout each of the stages, kicking the shit out of some enemies, do some platforming, and solving basic puzzles. And the combat, I have to say, is pretty satisfying. Sure, it's basic, but I think it works here, and there's a pretty healthy selection of moves that you're able to pull off. Satisfying finishes that ultimately utilize the quick time events we've come to expect from the genre, and you can unlock even more of these moves and upgrade your attributes by the end of each stage by using the essence that you get from killing off enemies. And I might be the only person that feels this way, but I actually really enjoy the Werehog segments except for two things. The first problem being that they can take a little bit too long for this being a Sonic game, and I'm pretty sure you all know what the next thing is I'm going to be bringing up. You see, I'm not even gonna insult your intelligence, because if we're talking about Sonic Unleashed in a video like this, and I bring up the negatives, you already can subconsciously hear that next complaint already in your head, no matter how much that you wish you could just make it stop. So I'm going to respect your mental sanity and not blatantly bring up what the next complaint would be, because, you know, you already know what it is, right? Except that was a mistake on your part, because guess what? You're on my channel, and your inconvenience serves as entertainment for me. So that means... Moving on over to the PlayStation 2 version, I have to say that what I find kind of funny about this port is how the Werehog segments resembles less of a God of War clone and just more of a regular style beat 'em up, which is funny because, you know, this was the console that introduced that gameplay style in the first place, but I digress. It's not terrible though, it's just not as involved as the flagship version. But that itself isn't necessarily a complaint, which plays into what I've mentioned, that I feel like each of these versions do something better than the other, and I feel like it's time that we got into that now, isn't it? Now, in Sonic Unleashed, your main method of progression are the Sun and Moon medals, these things being essential for you to unlock more stages so that you can go further into the game. And the way how you obtain these things are different in each version. On the flagship version, these things are actual physical collectibles like the rings you'll be finding in each of the stages. You're able to find them in each level's hub world, which, fun fact, is something I feel like the next-gen version does better than the last, because they're actual physical worlds that you're able to run around in, whereas on the PlayStation 2 and Wii version, these things have been effectively downgraded to pinboards with PNGs on them, which I'll talk about in a second. And you're still able to find these medals in the main Sonic stages as well as the Werehog stages. Now, with these things being physical collectibles that you're able to find within both of these stages, are you able to tell me what you think that the biggest problem with this might be? Do you see the speed of these Sonic stages? Holy shit, I almost feel like it's luck-based whether or not you're able to see these things, let alone collect them. It's not as much of an issue in the Werehog stages because these things were built for slower paced exploration, but can you imagine playing for hours only to get to a point where you can't progress anymore because in the Sonic stages you missed like 20 of these things? This is where I think that the Wii and PlayStation 2 versions do it better, because the medals are literally awarded for you for playing these stages well, which I don't really need to explain. This is how it's supposed to be. So the best way how I can describe what each of these games do better than the other, if you were looking for the better graphics and gameplay, you stick to the main versions. If you want the better pacing, then you play the last gen version. Though sadly though, the only other issue with the last generation versions, because of either time constraints or something like that, there is a lot of cut content from the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo Wii versions, the hub worlds being one of them, which I don't really particularly think is as big of a problem, but I just really enjoy the idea of being able to explore these vast locations on the main version, to take in the atmosphere and talk to the locals like But still, I particularly think that Unleashed is legit a pretty worthwhile game. Just be prepared to hear that fucking battle theme over and over again. Onwards from one mascot to another, The Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon marks the end of two things. This sub-series of Spyro, as well as the publishing company Sierra Entertainment. But we're not really too deep to go into the history of the game as well as the company, so allow me to move onward. For the uninitiated, once again, The Legend of Spyro is a trilogy of games based on Spyro, our beloved dragon from the PS1 days. And the whole goal with this sub-series was to essentially reboot the franchise to be a little bit more gritty and serious as opposed to its PS1 counterparts, or even the earlier PS2 games. And it's no surprise why sometimes this trilogy can be considered Spyro, but Tolkien. It's even went as far as to cast big-name Hollywood actors like Gary Oldman to play like this father figure called Ignitus. And keeping up with the Tolkien theme, they even cast Elijah Wood as Spyro. So don't worry, Middle-earth fan, everyone's favorite hobbit has once played one of the most beloved video game characters before they turned him into a steamrolled pug. Now, as I mentioned, the series consists of 3 games. You know, the trilogy kinda needs them. A New Beginning in 2006, The Eternal Night in 2007, and Dawn of the Dragon in 2008. And I've only really played 2 of these games, A New Beginning, which is a game that I actually really like, and Dawn of the Dragon for the sake of this video. And oh boy, I'm not 100% too sure about how I feel with this game. Now, obviously, Dawn of the Dragon being the focus for this video specifically, it of course has a lot of the elements that make up a God of War game. It's a hell of a lot more combat focused, and with this game specifically, you and a buddy can actually team up with this. One of you taking control of Spyro and the other one controlling Cinder, who was introduced in the last game. And as the formula goes, you go throughout the stages, you kick the ever-loving shit out of the enemies, and take part in some quick-time events and solve some puzzles. And once again, you're able to upgrade certain attributes of all of these moves as well as the character's abilities. And if you look at this level up screen, it's pretty obvious to say where the inspiration came from. Except this time it doesn't look fucked up. And for a game like this, I have to say that I think that it excels in what it's trying to do. The combat feels satisfying, and it's what I'm pretty sure they were trying to focus on the most. And you even have 4 abilities, or I suppose breaths, that you can use in both combat and puzzle solving depending on whether or not you're playing as Spyro or Cinder. But this is now where I need to digress on stuff that makes me unsure about how I feel with this game. Now, whereas I think that the combat is fun and the best part about this game, the idea of the exploration and puzzle solving is where I'm pretty uncertain that if I'm just extremely shit at the game or if these things weren't implemented all too well. What I mean by that is some of the puzzles feel really weirdly designed in the sense that the solution of them is obvious, but the way of solving them isn't exactly explained to them all that much. Like one of the first puzzles being us needing to carry this lamp over to Hunter to unlock this door. Seems pretty easy, right? Until you realize that you can't reach it normally thanks to the layout of the platform. And this updraft, for some stupid reason, can't carry you all the way where you need to go while you're busy holding it. And every single time I attempted to try and solve this puzzle, then I realized this lever-ish looking thing over here that I assumed had something to do with trying to complete it. But there's no prompt, no text or hints, or anything explaining its relevance. So I was just confused shitless as to what I was supposed to do until I looked up a guide where I figured out that you need to use Spyro's electric breath to activate. Now, I'm uncertain if there was a hint or they actually alluded to being able to use this thing to solve the puzzle earlier and the method as to how you were able to activate the switch. If that was the case and I just missed it, then I will 100% take the blame on it. But if it wasn't there, I'm not 100% sure how you were able to figure out how to activate this thing without literally exhausting every single one of your resources to activate it. But regardless, even after I got past that puzzle and you're thrown into the semi-open environment, I just ended up getting lost and I had no idea where the hell I was supposed to go, because I guarantee you I have the worst navigational capabilities out of anybody that you will meet online, because I for shit wasn't able to figure out where I was able to go, and I just worry that if I'm already having this trouble early on, then I'm not sure how I'll fare later into the game. I don't really want to call it quits with this game yet though, because I feel like a lot of these issues that I was running into are a me exclusive problem. But for now, I think it's safer for everybody's sake that we just move on to the next game. And with the next game, we're hopping back on the movie train again with 2008's adaptation of Kung Fu Panda, a time long before we knew Jack Black as only being able to play himself. And where 90% of this movie just feels like one massive fat shit.
What are you gonna do, big guy? Shit on me?
Yeah,
Order up.
It truly was just a simpler time. Now, a lot of the consensus that I've heard online is that this game can be seen as Devil May Cry for babies. And whilst I can see where they're coming from, you play as a chungus, meaning that this gameplay style is a little bit slower in nature and it lends itself a lot more to a God of War experience. And I gotta say, Kung Fu Panda is a pretty good one again. I don't feel like I really need to keep repeating myself here, but the gameplay itself is incredibly satisfying, especially thanks to the prologue chapter, where you essentially have all of your abilities unlocked from the start, which gives you a good enough idea about what you're going to be able to accomplish later in the game. But once you finish that and you really properly start the game where all of those abilities are stripped away, I still particularly think that this is a pretty solid God of War clone. My only real gripe with this game, in a similar sense to Sonic Unleashed, is that you're going to be hearing things from this game in your nightmares, because whereas in Unleashed it was the battle themed, in this game, it's this.
Hello, my ladies-in-longs, it's me, Nature Long, and as you can see over there, we got ourselves a very rare species of panda called Obesius pandusi, and as you can listen now, it's busy initiating in a mating call.
Needless to say, I had a good time playing this game, and by the looks of it, you're actually able to play as a lot of other characters. I only really got to this point where I played as Tigress and took part in this boss fight where it seemed like 90% of it was QTE based, so I'm eager to jump back into this game to see what else it has to offer. Returning to the world of Sega gritty reboots, we have Golden Axe Beast Rider, and once again, much like Altered Beast, it's not really all that good. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people should be aware of this game's reputation if you've watched Watch Mojo back in the day. You know, back when they were still watchable and not having meltdown. And believe you me, I'm surprised how accurate their description of this game was in terms of its quality and gameplay. Now, of course, once again, for this game being featured on this video, we have ourselves a third-person hack-and-slash game. You're going to be going through a shit ton of hordes of enemies, killing them off in brutal, gory, different ways. And with this game specifically, it took a lot of its cues from Crash of the Titans, because one of the biggest selling points towards Beast Rider was the ability to mount different beasts that all have their own unique abilities. But you will quickly come to learn that that selling point was a wet dream, because in my playtime I have mounted many of these beasts, and take that sentence as you wish, but the mere act of staying on them was a completely different challenge entirely, because the second that you get attacked you get knocked off of your mount, and even if you don't, I found controlling them was rather unsatisfying as well as really clunky, where I personally think that the best way to enjoy this game is to just stay on foot. Yeah, the gameplay itself wasn't particularly great, but it's a hell of a lot better than mounting the beast that the game is named after, getting hit once and wondering why the hell you were able to climb on them in the first place. You'll also notice that this is going to be one of the shorter entries in the video, because there's not really all that much to talk about with this game. The on-foot combat might be fine enough, but the gameplay itself is rather repetitive, and one half of the game doesn't even really work all that well, so what's the point of really going any further? Now, if you remembered back in my Devil May Cry video, you'll remember one of the earliest games I took a look at for this video, which, looking back on it, I think it might have been the very first one, was Spawn Armageddon, a game that took the established gameplay from DMC and put it into the world of a beloved comic book character. Well, here we've gotten ourselves another one with Hellboy: The Science of Evil. Now, this is one of those games that I decided to look at for this video that stressed me out to an extreme degree, and not just because it decided to crash after the first cutscenes. These are some of the things that us YouTubers need to deal with on the regular, you see. It was after I started playing the game, I was stressed to hell and back to whether or not I was gonna like this game in a similar sense to how I enjoyed Heavenly Sword. Because as you can imagine, this game is a God of War clone, from its use of fixed camera angles, slower paced combat, and use of QTEs. And let me tell you, if exhuming graves in real life required me to constantly hold down an R2 button and mash square, then I'll try and earn my living in more ethical ways, thank you very much. But as I was busy playing this game for the first couple of minutes, the first thought that went through my skull was that this game has a lot of mechanics that didn't seem like most of them work together all that much. What I mean by that is a large emphasis on this game is grabbing enemies and using them as either health packs or projectiles. But the first thing that you'll notice from looking at my gameplay is that these little fucks are a little bit too small for the big chonk and his massive jerk-off arm to catch. And when you do eventually end up grabbing one of them, the mere mere act of throwing the enemies isn't really as responsive as you might think, because now you need to use the right stick to aim where you want them to go, and sometimes the throwing reticle makes you aim at something that you didn't want to throw at, and sometimes it just gets blocked by random bullshit. But thankfully, as I kept playing, these minor issues were mitigated, and we were left with a pretty solid God of War clone with a little bit of some clunky mechanics. The combat feels quite heavy and meaty when you actually beat the shit out of the enemies, and once you get into the groove of grabbing them, it helps add a little bit of variety and an easy way to get your health back. And I'd be silly to not mention one of the game's other cooler features being Hellboy's revolver with the various types of ammos that you're actually able to pick up and use in the thing. And I have to say, I absolutely love this thing, not only because of how satisfying those clicks are whenever you pick different kinds of ammo types, but the sound it makes when you actually shoot someone. Now, sadly, I didn't get that far in the game. Being a YouTuber tends to do that to a person if you're trying to upload these videos on a frequent enough basis, but I still think I want to push myself a little more into trying to beat this game because I want to see what they can do to expand on the God of War formula set in this universe of Hellboy. Hell, I might end up loving this game even more, and those early minute jank might actually just be a bad memory for all we know. Oh, and don't think that I forgot about that little subsection of my audience, because there are even furries in this game, so you can take this to bed with you. But there is another part of my audience that I don't want to forget about completely, the small audience of mine that cares about ports of Hellboy: The Science of Eve, because if we're talking about a better port of this game, then the PSP version is actually where you want to be at, because this game might be a graphical downgrade when it comes to its main console counterpart, but in favor of that, it runs a hell of a lot smoother, the gameplay is a lot more dumbed down, but I think it works towards its benefit, and it adds its own little spin on the main game by having no voice acting. Was Ron Perlman too intense for this console? And hell, it even adds to the gameplay quite early on by not just allowing you to use your revolver earlier, but by allowing you to use grenades alongside your gun. So I definitely say that this is probably the version that you want to go out for if you don't really care about graphics and a little bit more of simplistic gameplay. Ladies and longs, I think out of all of the games I've talked about in this video thus far, this game and another one we'll be taking a look at real soon was one of the games that I'm pretty sure that everybody was eagerly waiting for me to get to. And what can I say? X-Men Origins Wolverine is pretty much a masterclass in not just making a great God of War clone, but making a great movie tie-in game. It takes the basis of a pretty shitty movie and turns it into what is unquestionably one of the greatest games of the 7th generation of consoles. But did you know that there were 2 other versions of the games that you could have played?
Yes, ladies and longs, we're not going to be taking a look at the big boy counterpart, we're going to be taking a look at the little guys that released alongside it.
With X-Men Origins Wolverine on the PlayStation 2, and by extension the Nintendo Wii, and the PSP version. And do you want to know what's kind of funny when you look at the PS2 and Wii versions of the game when you compare it to the big boy Xbox 360, PS3, and PC versions? This version actually resembles more of a God of War clone than even the base game. And most of that has to do with the controls, because gone is the free 360-degree camera of the main game in favor for fixed camera angles its inspiration was well known for, and dodging is done with the right stick aside from any other button, which already is a good start for making this game resemble more of a God of War clone than even its 7th generation counterpart. Is it better? Fuck no, but it's not terrible either. You see, a large part of what made the main game so appealing was the fact that this was technically the first ever true Wolverine experience that we've ever really gotten in video game form. Something that I feel wasn't able to be really replicated until Insomniac decided to take a crack at it an entire 17 years later. I mean, as of writing this video, the game isn't out yet, but from looking at the trailers, seems like it has a pretty good shot. This means that there were way more guts, way more gore, and more carnage than anything that the movies would have given us around the time. And on the older gen versions, it's not really all that much different. It really felt like the entire idea of these games was to explain how violent Wolverine can actually end up being and actually let us take part in that carnage. Although in the last generation versions, the blood has been significantly reduced, probably due to hardware limitations, I'm assuming. But to not make us miss out on any of the gory details, instead of showing it us, every single enemy that we end up killing will actually have to state how much they're it bleeding to really drive back home this point that this is supposed to be a lot more uber violent than its movie counterpart.
I can't stop the bleeding. So much fun.
Now, in terms of the game adapting the movie, what I find hilarious about this is that I think the 6th gen versions follow the plot a hell of a lot more cohesively than the big boy counterpart, because instead of just thrusting us into the jungle to labs to back to the jungle and shit like that, it seems like it's adapting the movie formula a lot more closely, because here we take control of Wolverine falling down a pit. I mean, following the day that led up to his lover being killed by Sabretooth, which is something I don't even really think we ever saw in the flagship version, aside from probably just being mentioned. But adapting the movie's story more accurately isn't exactly going to be winning award points, so how is the gameplay? I think it's pretty fine. It is your basic button mashing with light and heavy attacks as you've come to expect, and it still retains some additions to its gameplay to match with the Wolverine character. Stuff like his Scent, which allows you to sniff out secrets in the environments and just to tell you where to go in general. And you also have access to his Lung, which allows you to close in the gaps between you and enemies and to traverse certain parts of the environment. So ultimately, everything in this version still has the core DNA from the main game, with the exception of some more heavily toned down violence. I really would have loved to keep playing this version just to see what happens next, and obviously just to see the Deadpool fight, foreshadowing for further in the video by the way, but I got to the point where I activated a forklift and just couldn't figure out what to do next. So this is probably going to be the part in the video where I have to get up off my ass and get forklift certified just to see what else I'm supposed to do in the game. But I don't really have time for that type of shit, so let's move over to the PSP version. And once again, it's a pretty inoffensive port in and of itself. It seems to once again adapt the story in its own way, but in terms of the gameplay, it's fine. My biggest gripe with this downgraded port mainly stems from the overuse of slow motion. Like almost every single time you lunge or beat an enemy, the game would slow down and it really bogs down the pace of the combat, and I don't really like it all that much when you consider that this wasn't an issue in the big boy counterpart. But ultimately, if you really want my opinion on this, just stick to the mainline console versions. There is really nothing wrong with trying to test out these smaller experiences, but I only think that these smaller versions really just serve as novelties if you were really curious to see how this was adapted onto weaker hardware. Now here's one that I almost guarantee that most of you guys have already forgotten about, but don't worry, Mr. Long is right here to refresh your memory. Afro Samurai, released all the way back in 2009, is an adaptation of the manga series of the same name and was made famous by the anime starring our beloved Samuel L. Jackson. And if you were curious, he is in this game, so you can be serenaded with his motherfucker voice line throughout the entire runtime.
Helps me sleep so peacefully at night.
And this was another one of those games that I actually really liked back in the day when I first played it, but unfortunately, as age tends to do, my revisit to this game made me realize how little this game has gracefully aged. I mean, that mostly within its gameplay. The visuals, I'd say, are still pretty much A+. Now, what would be the big problem with the gameplay, you might be asking? Well, you see, something that Afro Samurai does that baffles me is its larger emphasis on being immersive. There's literally no HUD in this game. Everything that happens is usually indicated visually, like enemies or yourself flashing red when your health gets too low, and usually where you need to go only being highlighted via a quick cutscene, and you basically needing to match the environment from where you are to what the game showed you where you need to go next. It's an interesting stylistic choice in its own way that I can't really complain all too much about. It's just a design choice that makes no sense given the type of game that we're talking about here. But what I can complain about, however, is the game's combat, because this shit is clunky as all hell. Combos barely feel responsive when you pull them off. There's really not any physical feedback that makes you feel like you are busy hacking off enemies' limbs, and it just doesn't really feel all that satisfying from a fundamental core gameplay perspective. And the reason why I assume that they've done this is that they could put more emphasis on the slow motion focus mode, where everything goes slowed down and you can essentially aim your shots to attack certain points of the enemy's body, which does mostly end off with some extremely good looking dismemberment. It kind of feels like an early precursor to what Metal Gear Rising would do 4 years later, but outside of that, it's really not as fun as I remember it, just because of how clunky the core gameplay is. Maybe this could just be a me issue of me being too in a hurry to get through all of these games that I didn't really take the time that the game wanted from me to really learn the ins and outs of the gameplay. But if I was able to jump into the last couple of games with close to no issue, then why should I make the effort with this game? At the very least, it does keep up the late 2000s, early 2010s tradition of unnecessarily having uncensored tits. So I guess if you're a degenerate, this game is a 10 out of 10, but I'm not degenerate enough to stop and gawk at 2009 cel-shaded boobas. I am already currently in the process of making a video where I take my milk with fur. There is also a sequel to this game that was notoriously so shit that it got delisted, and I have found methods of trying to get this game, but I'm not really in the mood to risk my PC's health just to play a shitty game for my YouTube channel because you guys really do not pay me enough for this.
But now you may have noticed that we've also reached the end of our samurai list. So I think that the best samurai game that we've personally taken a look at in this video is Samurai Champloo, closely followed by Samurai Western. Then following that we have Afro Samurai, and unfortunately in last place we have 7 Samurai 20XX. So if you are always curious to know which samurai game lets you samurai at the best, then here's the definitive list. Now, don't try stealing this template, it's mine.
Now, if you can remember back in my Nintendo Wii horror games video, I did briefly mention Deadly Creatures because some people did end up classifying this as a horror game. But upon me playing it a while ago, I 100% can tell you that this is a God of War clone, only this time you take control of tiny bugs. I will say, however, that this game does attempt to give off a horror vibe if we're going off of this intro that genuinely looks something that you'd see on some shitty analog creepypasta video on YouTube. But the scary vibes just tend to fade away when you reach the gameplay. Now, in Deadly Creature, the main gameplay loop consists of you taking control of what I'm assuming is a bunch of insects that all have their own unique abilities. The only two that I was able to play with being this tarantula and the scorpion. I'm not too sure if you're going to end up controlling other types of insects or other types of animals, but honestly, after playing this myself, I wasn't really all that eager to find out. Now, you see, the game's levels are also pretty basic. You explore the game's world, or should I say shit like burrows, because I mean, we are bugs after all, so they can be as batshit with the level design as they want to take advantage of our size. And when it comes down to the combat, we do end up battling other bugs, and I gotta say, how some of these enemy bugs are introduced to us are funny as all hell. Like this, I'm gonna say cockroach, I think that just MK fatalities this beetle, I think, into the spike of a cactus. And yes, you're gonna realize very quickly, I'm not very good at identifying insects. I'm not Asmongold. And this is where the problem with the gameplay starts to rear its ugly head. Now, you see, how you attack in this game is pretty straightforward. Press the A button to do basic strikes, and that's pretty easy to understand. But this is where that good old-fashioned Nintendo bullshit is going to start rearing its ugly head. And if you remember what I said in my last video,
if it's inconvenient for the player, leave it in!
Because in order to do your combos, you don't just simply press the A button multiple times, maybe in combination with the B button. No. What you need to do is, after tapping the A button, you're then tasked with swinging the controller either horizontally or vertically to do extra combinations or to do a heavy strike. So something that could have been just a simple, basic, easy to get into combat system just gets needlessly complicated because of Nintendo nonsense. This is what ultimately turned me away from keep playing, because it just was really starting to get a little bit annoying to keep swinging my controller like I'm trying to signal a plane for a landing, when the combat could have just been made a lot more fun and intuitive if you just stuck with the basic button layout. And it kind of sucks as well, because I really wanted to see how batshit they could keep making this premise, because when we got to the actual boss fights, they're equally as batshit, because this fight here against this rattlesnake is essentially this game's equivalent to the God of War 1 Hydra boss fight at the beginning of the original game. It even has its own QTEs in order to take the thing out. But unfortunately, this game's insistence on motion controls is something that I didn't really have the patience to sit through, just because of how clunky and unresponsive it sometimes felt. Which is a shame though. If they maybe removed it and gave us classic controller support, I think I would have actually enjoyed this a hell of a lot more. But we're not done with the Nintendo Wii yet, because now we have 2009 Spyborgs, a game that was published by Capcom of all companies. And I do have some nostalgic memories with this game myself. I can remember playing it. Nostalgia over. Now, the premise of this game is that you take control of 3 separate characters, or Spyborgs as they're referred to, and you go throughout each stage kicking the shit out of a bunch of enemy, breaking shit to get currency to get unlocks for your characters, lather, rinse, repeat. There you go, thanks for coming. And where the variety of the gameplay comes from to break up the repetitive structure is the fact that you have 3 different characters that each all have their own unique abilities. Like for instance, I don't know what the names are, so Spyborg 1 having a gun arm and moderately powerful, Spyborg 2 being a big chonk that's the slowest out of everybody in the cast, but does of course have the strongest attacks, and he somehow reminds me of Dog from Half-Life 2, and Spyborg Woke being the fastest and most arguably the most fun to control out of all of the characters. Now I know what you're thinking. John, your hair looks nice today. What about this game takes on the more God of War approach instead of just being your regular point A to point B beat 'em up? Well, my ladies in long, this game does feature a hectic amount of quick time events, and they're quite implemented in the strangest of ways. So you see, as you're busy exploring the stages, you'll come across some of these objects in the environment that can be broken to give you health, give you currency so you can upgrade your characters, or to charge your ultimate ability. But sometimes, these crates are invisible, only being noticeable because of how they're warped into the background. And the only way you're able to get them so that you can reap the benefits that each of them have, or if you point the Wii Remote cursor over it, and then by completing a quick time event to make them visible, so that you can claim the rewards that are inside. And the same is applied to your character's ultimate ability. You activate it and need to complete a series of quick time events in order to pull off the move successfully, although that actually makes a hell of a lot more sense than just pointing at a box and then breaking it, when you could just fucking break it normally. But you see, something that this game does that I absolutely love is you may have noticed that a lot of the QTEs that show up on screen are indicated by needing to swing the Wiimote in a certain direction, which I've mentioned a lot in my Wii Horror Games video, is something I've learned with age doesn't really add anything to the core game and just is an unnecessary extra step where if you swing too hard you might end up getting a hernia. But Spyborgs allows you to turn the motion controls off in favor of more traditional button prompts, making the whole idea of running through these stages and completing quick time events every 2 seconds a hell of a lot more enjoyable. Sure, you still need to aim your controller at the screen to find the invisible items, but that's way more acceptable with just a simple button press than needing to shake the controller to imitate a gang sign. So while I just found this game to be okay, it's definitely something I see myself coming back to just because I was able to customize the game to have a more comfortable control style. Once again, ladies and longs, as I mentioned back with X-Men Origins Wolverine, I'm pretty sure that this is one of the games that I think everybody who saw this video was eager to see. And it's with Dante's Inferno, without a doubt probably one of the greatest God of War clones of all time, and probably one of the most beloved games from the 7th generation. This game that loosely follows the events of Ultra Kill probably is without a doubt a game that I'm pretty sure a million different kinds of people have so many fond memories with its combat and gameplay that is almost one-to-one as enjoyable as its inspiration to Satan's cock. There truly was really no other game that managed to capture what made God of War so special, but put its own spin on it.
But did you know it can also run on a potato? It was upside down.
And obviously, since the PSP is essentially a portable PS2 with some downgrades, obviously EA wanted to see how their inspired game would fare on such a little system. And honestly, for the short amount of time that I've played this port, it's pretty much the exact same as the console versions, except now it looks like a Nintendo Switch port. But yeah, this game is practically untouched aside from the graphics and drop in performance. And I'm not 100% too sure if this is the case or not, but I am pretty convinced that maybe some things were cut from the main game, though I'm not 100% too sure on that. The combat is still as smooth as it was in the base game, it still retains the spectacle, it still has all the quick time events as well as the holy and unholy mechanics from the base game. It's really impressive to think how well this new IP that was primarily built with 7th generation consoles in mind was adapted to the small handheld. I do kind of find it funny though that certain parts of the game's cutscenes are just the in-engine cutscenes from the main game, and if you were emulating this game like me on a big screen, it is incredibly jarring and it is pretty obvious to see where the limitations of the system were showing up. It almost kind of feels like what happens when a Discord mod logs on. But yeah, I definitely think that if you are a fan of the main game, then this will be a great little novelty just to see how it was able to be brought over to such a weaker system. And once again, there's still boo! No, ooh boy. Now moving on to a game that a lot of people just have an absolutely large raging hate boner for is Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2.
Oh. Oh.
Now, I'll only be discussing Force Unleashed 2 for this video because I genuinely feel that when it comes down to a whole God of War angle, I think that this one does it a hell of a lot better than the original game. And maybe if I ever do a follow-up to this video, I'll talk a little bit more about the first game in a little bit more depth. But when it comes down to the natural progression of the series, I actually think that when it comes down to the combat side of everything, I think that Force Unleashed 2 does it a hell of a lot better than the original. Firstly, by giving Sam Witwer 2 lightsabers. This is the equivalent of giving Leon a hatchet in Requiem. Is there any particular reason for it? No, it's just cool, so accept it and shut up. And that decision makes the combat have a lot better of a flair and gives you a hell of a lot more combat variety when you only had one in the original game. And when it comes down to combining your combat abilities with the various amount of force power you have access to, I just think it flows a hell of a lot better. Now, I am probably one of the only few people on this planet that defends this game because of how I feel they took the combat aspect of the original game and just improved it by 11 for this one. And I think it's all the better for it. The first game is not bad at all whatsoever, don't get me wrong, but I do feel like when you compare the two, it's a lot more slower paced and the combat itself isn't really as smooth as I think a lot of people would have you believe. Somehow I think the PS2 and Wii versions did a little bit better. But the thing is, the reason why I think that's the case is the original Force Unleashed was more about exploiting your force powers to make you truly feel like this unstoppable badass. It's a hell of a lot more of a Darth Vader kind of experience, you know? In the original games, your force powers are so powerful that you didn't even really need to ignite your lightsaber in order to wipe out hordes of enemies, which I really think personally worked in that game. But in 2, what if you added those force powers to somebody who knew how to handle not just one but 2 lightsabers, and the result of that would be Force Unleashed 2. Yeah, I can agree that it does get a little bit repetitive, but I do think that this game has got a lot more going on with it for it being set in the Star Wars universe and the amount of force powers you're able to utilize that I think it can slightly be forgiven. If you just really wanted a Jedi power fantasy, that adds a hell of a lot more of that God of War-esque design that the original game was trying to go for. Hell, you want to know what's also funny? I need to give some props to the Nintendo Wii version for allowing that kind of power to be replicated on a weaker system. I genuinely think that people really need to go back and look at this game in hindsight and realize just how much more fun this game is. And with the current state of Star Wars, I think really even the worst back then can be much better than anything we have right now. Though, we have a Dark Forces remaster. Where is my remaster for Jedi Outcast?
I got a headache. I'm enjoying a willy.
Come here. Fuck! I am killing you! Now what will finally be our last movie tie-in game for this video, we have a game that is based on what a lot of people would consider to be one of the worst superhero movies ever made, and that was 2011's Green Lantern starring Ryan Reynolds. A movie where I can confirm the supersuit was green and animated. It's a little bit of Deadpool knowledge. Ooh, for sure! Regardless, since we're nearing the end of this video, I don't really want to harp on for this for too long. To commemorate the movie, we got ourselves a video game alongside it, and the one that I want to highlight for this video specifically is the PlayStation 3 and 360 version, because the less I see about the Wii version, the better I'll be able to sleep at night. Now, the flagship version of this game, as I mentioned for the past 2 hours at this point, is a God of War clone. And once again, we have another situation where I think the game itself is a hell of a lot better than the movie that it's based on. And this game is unapologetically God of War, which I honestly really think helps the game in its benefit, because they can really just heavily focus on trying to make the game fun as hell. And what is really cool about this game specifically, and I'm extremely pissed off that not a lot more people saw the potential of adapting Green Lantern into a video game, is the sheer limitlessness of the ring, which I think was actually captured quite nicely in this game. Well, limitless in theory. If there were literally infinite amounts of shit that you can conjure up in this game while running on 7th generation hardware.
What's up, MTV Cribs, and welcome to my crib. Sorry for the whole place looking like it's going to shit. I tried to conjure up a full-scale size version of the Burj Khalifa using Green Lantern on the PS3.
Now, what I mean by that is that a major part of this game's combat is the more that you play, the more you're able to level up hell. Also, as a little bit of a bonus, this game is co-op, so you and a buddy can take part in all of this chaos together. Just thought I'd throw that out there. We need more God of War co-op clones like this. And with this XP, you're essentially able to unlock additional constructs to add to your weapon weapon list. Like, for example, you have this long-range attack where you're able to blast a laser from your ring. You can manifest this big-ass hammer that can do some serious damage and serves a larger purpose because you can use this thing in stuff like puzzle solving. You have these chained maces, which are literally just a cyclone of chaos, so it's great for crowd control and to get a lawsuit from Santa Monica Studios. And you even get my favorite, a Gatling gun. It's just so fun to spam this son of a bitch, and there's so many more you're able to collect as the game progresses. And that's what keeps this game from getting stale, because along with the level ups, you have this constant feeling of progression, which really helps add to this game in the long run. And it really helps this game stand out from its competition, not only in God of War clones, but with comic book games and movie tie-ins in general. So if you're ever in the market for a great co-op God of War experience and are a fan of Green Lantern, and even if you're one of the 2% of creatures that actually ended up liking the movie, this game is a pretty great addition to the collection. Now, remember also how I mentioned with this game, how it being unapologetically a God of War clone really worked in its benefit? Well, that kind of perfectly segues us into our next game, Marlow, Briggs and the Mask of Death, released in 2013. And this game is ultimately a better God of War clone than that other one that we got in the same year. Now, I'm gonna give this game a 100% recommendation if you want to go back and relive the glory days of this fantastic gameplay style before paternity took over. Because much like games like Dante's Inferno and Green Lantern, this game is 100% unapologetic in what its inspiration is. It's got the flashy combos, it's got the quick time events, and most importantly, it's got the soul of that era when these were the types of character action games that were abundant back in the days. I think it's the reason why these types of games ended up working out so well, in the same way how stuff like maybe Left 4 Dead clones like Vermintide, Darktide, or any kind of Souls-like really works. It's basically one-to-one with its own little coat of paint, with not too much to deviate itself from its original inspiration, and I don't always necessarily think that that's a bad thing whatsoever. But if you paid attention to that little time thing at the bottom of this video, we're almost done here. And the next game was a pretty tough choice if I wanted to keep it into this video or not, but it seems like a lot of you wanted it, so up next is... Is it a God of War clone? Probably not. Is this probably one of the most underrated games of the 7th generation? 100%. Deadpool, developed by High Moon Studios and released in 2013 on PC, Xbox 360 and PS3, got delisted on those platforms, got a remaster on the next generation systems in 2016, I believe, to coincide with the release of the movie, and then got delisted again. Gotta love licensed video games. Now, the reason why I think that this game is so beloved to me and so many other people is of course the humor and the self-aware nature of the whole game. I mean, we literally have Deadpool wanting to star in his own video game adventure and constantly butts heads with the developers and essentially pretty much wasting the entire budget of the game in the first hour. But I'm not really sure what to add with this game that already hasn't been said. But some of the people who are saying anything about this game are full of shit, so I'm just gonna tell you this right now. This is probably one of the most fun action-packed hack and slash games that you could have ever played back then. Yeah, the combat itself does seem a little bit stiff in comparison to every single other game that we've mentioned, and the implementation of ranged weapons is kind of meh when it comes down to the shooting, but there's just nothing but pure charm that oozes from every single angle of this video game, and you won't convince me other than Ryan Reynolds that no one will ever be able to do justice to Deadpool like Nolan North. This man just makes every single line delivery and banter between him and the two voices in his head, as well as every other character that you meet in the game, so fun and always just wants you to hear what he has to say next. And the level of fan service here for not only just video game fans but also Marvel fans rivals even some of the more obvious fan servicey kinds of games like Marvel vs. Capcom or Ultimate Alliance. And this game really deserves credit for really making you feel like Deadpool in the same way that Arkham made you feel like Batman, or how Spider-Man PS4 made you feel like Spider-Man, or how One Chanbara makes you feel like a chud. The game itself is just really such a blast, and I genuinely had so much fun revisiting it for this video. But now, we reach a little bit of a disappointing turn in this video because I've got to call out the greedy indie developer.
developers.
Now, you'll remember in my Devil May Cry clones video, I dedicated an entire segment to indie Devil May Cry clones. But after dedicating so many hours of researching, there isn't really a lot of games that adapt classic God of War in the indie scene. Not from what I was able to find anyway. Every single game that I found were either nothing like God of War, or fuck it, not even in the same genre I was looking for, or they resemble too much of Devil May Cry again. So I was a little bit worried that I couldn't really showcase any indie titles. Until this. So Raji, an Ancient Epic was a game that my brother actually introduced me to when he was going through his collection of games and mentioned that this game was rather similar to God of War. And after he showed me some gameplay, I knew that this had to be something that needed to be featured in this video. And lo and behold, when I came back to my house and loaded up Steam, there was actually a demo I was able to sample on Steam. And when I decided for the first time in a blue moon to renew my PlayStation Plus, or, you know, just to sign in before my 30 days were up, I actually saw that it was part of the subscription service, so I knew that I had no excuse to include this game in this video. Now, while I don't think that this game itself is one-to-one God of War like the other games that I've mentioned in this video, it does share enough that I feel like it's a pretty good addition to have for this. Now, in Raji, you take control of Raji on the search for her brother Gol. And on your travels in the intro of the game, you're bestowed this magical weapon by gods that are heavily steeped in Hindu culture. And that's really something I don't think I've ever really seen before in a video game. We're all used to seeing video games take inspiration from Norse, Greece, Japanese, or American culture, but Hindu culture is uncharted territory for me, and I was all here for it. But when it comes down to the gameplay, it's kinda split up into two things: platforming segments as well as combat. The platforming segments being a hell of a lot more in line with something like old school PS2 Prince of Persia, whereas the combat and puzzle solving is no doubt the God of War aspect. But what I really like about this game's combat is that there's a very large emphasis on using parts of the environment to damage enemies, like running onto a wall to make you do a powerful ground slam, running onto these poles that allow you to do a spinning attack that can hit almost most enemies, so it's great for crowd control. It's a pretty unique idea, and it really makes this game stand out from everything we've taken a look at here. It does carry a little bit of that DNA though with Devil May Cry as well, in that aspect of using the environment to damage enemies, but the more slower pace and grander scale of this game is a hell of a lot more like God of War, which I think qualifies it for this list. I had to admit, this game was pretty fun, and I would have loved to keep playing to see what else it's able to do to add to the foundation I already experienced, but I can comfortably say that I'll be going back to this game in the future, and it is something that is very well worth checking out. And I'm also incredibly happy for the devs because there's actually currently a sequel in the works, and I'd love to see what they're able to do to expand on this original.
Helloing once again, ladies and longs. It is me, Future Long here. As you can see right now, I'm currently in the editing phase of this video, and we are almost done. We are at the final two games. And you guys remember Alter Beast from the beginning of this video? Well, let's just say there's another game that came out that I consider a God of War clone that came out back in 2021. But since that game is shit, I asked one of my best buddies if he didn't want to hop onto it, so go subscribe to his channel in the bottom, and I will see you guys at the final game.
Hi there, ladies and longs. Ooh, that's weird. I'm Mackie Dave, and to quote every other YouTuber, I didn't want to talk about Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood. What a mouthful. 5 years ago, I covered this game on my channel, and apparently it's a God of War clone, which is why, after leaving the game, I'm being pulled back in. Developed by Cyanide and published by Nacon, Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood is a hack and slash based on the tabletop game of the same name. The world of Werewolf the Apocalypse throws around a few terms that are confusing to those who aren't familiar with this franchise, so let me educate before eviscerating. Garou are werewolves, black spiral dancers are Garou that have been corrupted by the worm. The worm is the main antagonist of the game. It's a malevolent force that corrupts everything, including the earth, Gaia. Endrin is a massive corporation that's polluting the environment, making them the natural enemy of Gaia and her warriors, the Garou. Endrin is also considered a tool of the worm. The Karen are a Garou's pack. Now that I've explained some of the terms, let's break down the game. Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood lets you take control of Cahal, a Garou who's part of the Tarker's Mill Cairn. Cahal and his Cairn, on a night of environmental terrorism, are thrown for a loop when Endrin reveals that they have a black spiral dancer in their employ. The black spiral dancer kills Cahal's wife, causing Cahal to let the rage infect his body. Rage is a tool of the worm, and in his rage, Cahal kills a fellow Cairn member. Once Cahal regains his sanity, he goes on a self-appointed exile. Years later, Cahal comes back to Tarker's Mill after overhearing Endrin's plan to attack Tarker's Mill. Your objective is to take the fight to Endrin and stop them once and for all. Cahal has three forms: his human form, his lupus form, and his Krynos form. Most of the game has Cahal infiltrating entrance facilities, forcing you to switch between all of these forms. In Cahal's human form, he can turn off cameras, open doors, silently take down enemies, and sabotage enemy reinforcement points. Cahal's lupus form allows you to go through vents and move quickly around the map. Finally, there's Cahal's Krynos form. And yes,
smash.
In his Krynos form, Cahal can switch between two stances, Agile and Heavy. Both of these stances have extra abilities that can be bought in the skill tree, and you can gain points by collecting enough XP from combat encounters. During combat encounters, if you do enough damage, you can unleash Frenzy Mode, where you harness the rage and put it to good use. You can't save a full meter for bosses or other encounters, so when you get it, use it. A cool thing that the game does is arm certain enemies with silver bullets, and if you're shot, it lowers your health for the rest of the encounter. Later in the game, when it gets more chaotic, these silver bullet soldiers can do a bunch of harm, forcing you to think on instinct, like a werewolf. Ow! My favorite thing about the game is the music though. The heavy metal gives the game an undeniable amount of aura, so much so that it makes you forget for a moment that this game is mid. Some of my favorite tracks from the soundtrack are Bleeding Soul and Krynos Rage. Now that I've laid the groundwork, let me get into my issues with the game. When you're infiltrating bases, you can either go through it stealthily, or wolf out and tear down entrance forces. The game's main appeal is transforming into a werewolf and ripping people to shreds, so I don't understand the point of offering a stealth option. There's not even an incentive to complete a level without transforming, and there's no consequence for getting caught. You're just forced into transforming, and you can use people as your own personal chew toy. In the 2003 movie game tie-in for Ang Lee's Hulk, the game was split into two sections. One section has you rampaging as the Hulk, and the other section has you infiltrating bases as Bruce Banner. In the Bruce Banner sections, you complete puzzles and avoid attention at all costs, because once you're caught, you transform into the Hulk, and that's a game over. There's a time and a place between the two halves of Banner, and there are consequences for crossing the streams. In Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood, there are no consequences, so it makes the implementation of stealth superfluous. To understand the developer's point of view, the game does get extremely repetitive. Shock! Being an attractive werewolf that kicks ass can get a bit tiring when done over and over and over again for 6 or so hours. So the implementation of slower moments, like interacting with the cast and the various environments, as well as stealth sections, could, in theory, break up the monotony. But the game doesn't really commit to these stopgaps, and it just makes you want to wolf out and get it over with, which is the last thing you want to feel with any game. The last thing I want to address is the performance and overall look of the game. When I got my copy 5 years ago, I recorded my playthrough on my PS4, and the game looked like a 7th generation game. Ugly as fuck. The intro cinematic is beautifully animated and rendered, so imagine my surprise when the game goes from World of Warcraft cinematic to this!
Holy fish paste!
I addressed this in my review and I feel like a dunce for not bringing it up here. Why does this character look like Oscar Isaac? And why does Cahal look like Jared from Avalanche Reviews? On top of the game looking ugly, it has texture popping issues and glitches like enemies popping out of designated respawn points and jittering when interacting with certain things. I haven't touched the game in years, bought it on sale so I can record it on my up-to-date and powerful gaming laptop, and I was shocked that these issues never got fixed. Even the finishing moves are a joke. It promises this gruesome moment and it cucks you by looking like this. I understand that gore is not a qualifier for peak werewolf destruction, but it's the small things that pile on and sour the experience. Once you wrap your head around that, the in-game cutscenes are rough. I remember calling these Source Engine cutscenes, and yeah, I agree with past me. Honestly, Cahal is the only decent looking model in the game, and is such a jarring juxtaposition when he's in the same room as these chuckleheads. What were they thinking? I've been pretty harsh with this game, so I want to end off by mentioning a moment from the game that I enjoyed. After returning to your cairn in Tarkar's Mill, you have to meet with Yefen, who is like an avatar for Gaia, specific to the Tarkar's Mill cairn. Yefen gives you your main quest, but requests that before you go off, you need to help the fallen Garou move on to the afterlife, because currently they're stuck in a purgatory type state. Cahal goes around the hub area, telling each of his fallen Garou that their work is done and they can move on. And the fallen Garou, thank you, are happy to see Cahal after years of exile and ask him to protect the cairn. Of course, this moment is kind of cheapened with Cahal's Krynos model default posing like an MMO NPC, but it still tugs at the heart a bit. It makes his war and world feel more real. I'm not a fan of this game, but it does make me interested in the world of Werewolf the Apocalypse. It just sucks that that interest is given and yet not satisfied within that sim experience. Thanks for having me on, Mr. Long. Love you guys, and Shalmumu. More like Shamla. Woo!
But ladies and longs, you see, there is technically one more indie game that we need to talk about for this video, and its position as an indie game is a little bit questionable when you take a deeper look into its development. And the game that we're going to be talking about is this little game called Captain Blood. Now remember all the way back in the beginning of the video how I talked about how Pirates of the Caribbean would be a hell of a lot more relevant later in the video? Well, this is the game that's been leading up to it, because Captain Blood was almost a game that never saw the light of day. You see, Captain Blood, whilst it was released in 2025, it's originally a game that was pitched all the way back in 2003, and the original developers of the game was going to be a company called Akela, who has developed a few games like Sea Dog under Bethesda in 2000, and an adaptation of Pirates of the Caribbean in 2003. They also had their hand in making stuff for like the Postal games, so somehow it seems like Jack Sparrow and Bin Laden might have one thing in common. And the next game that they were going to develop was Captain Blood, an adaptation of the novels by writer Raphael Sabatini. But it would seem after the initial pitch of the game, development halted and restarted at the end of 2003. But that's not the last time we would hear about the game, because it was also featured in E3 2004 as part of publisher 1C Company's upcoming titles. But then development of the game restarted again in the same year, where they decided that they wanted to make this game a hell of a lot more darker and edgy than the original pitch. Later, the company PlayLogic, who developed the PlayStation iPad games, yes, I am being 100% serious right here, signed on to become the publisher of the game in 2005, and once again, development of the game was restarted. And moving on from 2005 to 2006, the original company Akela sold one of its internal studios, Sea Wolves, to 1C Companies after a legal battle with PlayLogic over the rights to the game. And because of restarting development so many fucking times, the game also ended up moving systems from Microsoft Windows and the original Xbox to the Xbox 360. And in June of 2008, the game was brought into the public eye yet again because it received the trailer as well as allowing media outlets to play the game for itself. There was also a website launched for the game back in 2010. But oopsie daisy, PlayLogic unfortunately declared bankruptcy at the time, effectively cancelling the game indefinitely. But however, an entire decade later, some developers of Akela founded a company in London called Sneg, which is one swapped letter away from causing a Twitter uproar. And it's thanks to some of the previous company's alumni, Oleg Klapovsky and Artem Struiko, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. They both ended up deciding to try and negotiate to have the game revived, and on May 6th of 2025, the game finally saw the light of day after 12 years of development hell. It's kind of insane to think that this little game that launched last year, that I only guarantee a small subset of the internet even thought of, had probably one of the most interesting development hell stories of all time. And it's kind of funny to think because this game isn't even really brought up in the conversation of games that were in development hell, the notorious ones being Duke Nukem Forever, Final Fantasy 15, Dead Island 2, or The Last Guardian. But regardless, the game is available now for everybody to play, and what's it like? It is a relic in the best way possible. Now, what's upsetting to think is that when you look at the online outlets, they would consider Captain Blood to be one of 2025 most disappointing or worst games. And my real question to them would be, what the hell is wrong with you? I didn't even really end up looking at any of those reviews in detail for this video or in general because I just do not understand the idea of how people can think that this game is so bad. So please feel free to let me know in the comments why that is, and please feel free to correct me whether or not my assumptions for what I'm about to say, why those reviews might be so negative, might be correct. I assume that these people probably looked at the game in the current climate of gaming back in 2025 and just judged it based off of the idea that it felt like an outdated game when you compare it to the big hitters of that year. And my answer to that entire thing would be, yes, this game was supposed to launch on the OG Xbox and the Xbox 360, and this build that we have access to is probably reworked code from a 2008 game. So yeah, of course it's gonna be outdated and it's probably not gonna feel like the shiniest, newest thing on the planet. It was supposed to be a game that would have released either 3 or 2 generations ago, but it kind of makes you question, had this game come out back in 2008, or around the time that it was supposed to, when God of War clones were just starting to make the rounds, how how would this game have fared all the way back then? But that's just what the gaming journalists that reviewed this game wants you to believe, so allow me to tell you what I personally think of the game. Whilst I don't think it's perfect by any means, I think that the game is a perfect throwback title to the good old days when these types of games were a dime a dozen. Firstly, I think it's got itself a nice cartoony art style that perfectly would have fit back in the early days of the Xbox 360. The game is still gory as shit, the combat is responsive and smooth, there's a healthy selection of weapons you're able to acquire from both long-range and short-range weapons to dish out even more damage. It's even got situations where you're able to man some heavy-duty firepower to mow down enemies or their ships, and it just has that early 2000s charm that I think a lot of games nowadays misses, which I mean makes sense given the year that this thing was supposed to come out. Is it outdated? Yeah, sure, but does that mean games like Devil May Cry 1 and God of War 1 or any other one of these games that we've talked about in this video is outdated? Yeah, but that doesn't matter because they're still extremely fun. Well, some of them. I just truly think that this game is a relic of just where gaming was at that point, and I really want you guys to give this game a go. It's not really all that expensive, and if you were missing the good old days of character action games, then this is something that I really think people need to really give a go. And I really want any indie dev to really try and take a look at this game and see what it was able to accomplish, and maybe you can take your own spin on this type of old school action adventure hack and slash game. As I hope you were able to see with this video, the sky is truly the limit with what you can do to adapt the success of what God of War was able to accomplish back in 2005. And it's clear because of the remakes that we're getting that there is still an audience for these types of games. And the nostalgia is massive with this, so I don't think that there's really any better time to give these kinds of games a shot than now. But I do think that's what I'm gonna call this video. Thank you guys so much for watching this big ass video. Oh my goodness, I think this is, for proper video standards anyway, this is the longest video I've ever done on my entire channel. And it's been so fun, but oh my goodness, I've started getting a little bit tired and I want to move on to other things. Also, I want to give like a little bit of a disclaimer, if that's the right way of saying it. I know that there's a lot of games that are probably considered God of War clones that I did not feature in this video, and unfortunately, there are a few games that I just decided to cut because I just didn't know what to say, don't think it fit to the pacing, or I didn't give it enough justice to make something properly funny with it. Maybe I'll do a follow-up to this video in future, and then I'll just talk about the games that I omitted from this. And if you guys didn't know, I also think I'm gonna do something Devil May Cry related again in the future. But right now, I want to move on to other things. So I want to say thank you so much again to everybody who watched this video all the way to the end. It's a very fucking long video, but thank you so much for that. Thank you so much to Aki Dave for stopping by and talking about Werewolf the Apocalypse. That game sucks, so I wasn't gonna fucking do it. I already had so many other games that I needed to talk about. And I want to say a massive thank you again to you guys for watching. I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who is supporting this channel through memberships or Patreon. My brother, RWSJ Productions, Poncho, and Eric. Just thank you so much for everybody who watches, supports this channel. But now, I want to pivot a little bit because I need to explain what's been going on after 3 months of me being absent. Mostly, it was because I was a little bit busy throughout that time with other work and other stuff like that. But if you guys can remember, from 3 months ago with the Resident Evil first-person shooters video, you may remember that I did mention that my stepfather has passed away from cancer, and it's been a total fuck up, for lack of a better word. But on the exact same day as the funeral, we've also lost one of our family dogs, a German Shepherd. Her name was Lily. And let's just say I've been wanting to do something for her for the longest time on the channel, like I did with my dog from last year. It's just the timing was terrible. It's been quite difficult to have to deal with 2 deaths in the family at the same time. But I want to end off this video because I did make her something that I've been wanting to make public on YouTube for the longest time, but of course I've just been way too busy with other work-related stuff. So I just wanted to like immortalize her like in the same way as my stepdad and my dog, and I hope that you guys enjoy and you commemorate. I think she's also been on like a bunch of our streams. I brought her on streams. I played with her on streams. It was just like the timing was terrible. So I just wanted to make this little slideshow to commemorate her memory so that she also has a place on this channel's history. So yeah, thank you guys again so much for stopping by, and I will see you guys in the next video.
Ja, roep me of moet ik voor allemaal wijs? Wil je voor roepen of moet ik voor allemaal wijs?
Ek het doodseker gemaak my naam staan nie ook in haar hoofstukke nie. Ek sien.
Tissa. Roep af. Roep af.
kampanje moet ek sy verjaarsdagviering en konsentreer.